everyone. Thank you for your patience, and I'm welcoming you to this afternoon's meeting of the Planning and Highways Committee on the 13th of January 2026, the first of this year. I'll hand you over now to Abby to announce the housekeeping arrangements.
Thank you, Chair. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, please take instruction from staff and stewards, the assembly pointers at Tudor Square. Please can I request everyone to switch mobile devices to silent mode so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting. The meeting today will be webcast and the recording will also be available for people to view later through the Council's website. It is also possible that Sheffield Live TV will record and rebroadcast the meeting. You should be aware that the Council is a data controller under the Data Protection Act. Data collected during this webcast will be retained in accordance with the Council's published policy. By entering the meeting room, you are consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting. While ever the meeting is open to the public, photography, video and sound recording of the proceedings is permitted. However, the Chair has discretion to withdraw or suspend this permission. For example, if the recording is disrupting the conduct of the meeting or is being undertaken in a manner which could capture personal information, or in the event that a member of the public participating in a meeting objects to being recorded. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Abby. We've received apologies for absence from Councillor Alan Woodcock and from Councillor Tony Downing. I'm going to ask each member in turn to introduce themselves. I should say that I'm Mike Chaplin. I'm a councillor for Southey Ward and a joint chair of this committee. I'm now going to hand you over to Nikki.
Thank you, Chair. Nikki Belfield, Councillor for Firth Park Ward.
Good afternoon, I'm Janet Riddler, Councillor for Stocksbridge and Upper Don.
Councillor Mark Whittaker, also Councillor for Stocksbridge and Upper Don. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Councillor Hill, Councillor for the Darnell Ward.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Gary Weatherall for Shire Green Brightside Ward. Councillor Henry Lottage for Hillsborough Ward.
Councillor Richard Williams, I represent the Standington Ward.
Andrew Sanger, Councillor for Forward Ward.
Glynis Chapman, Councillor for Mosborough Ward.
Cliff Woodcraft, Councillor for Fulwood Ward.
Marianne.
Good afternoon, Marianne Elliott, Councillor for Gleaders Valley Ward. Apologies for lateness.
Thank you, everyone. Item 3 on the agenda is exclusion of the press and public. We have no items today that require that. Item 4, declarations of interest. I should declare at this point that I've received a letter from Michael Barlow in relation to planning application 9C, the site of the former coffee house and cocoa house. Janet?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm declaring an interest too on the same item 9C, that I have already lodged an objection against that application and have registered to speak on it, so I will withdraw and not take part on any of the debate or voting on item 9.
Thank you, Janet. Glynis?
Yes, I shan't be speaking or taking part in the 9A, Middlecliff Rise, because I know the people involved. Thank you.
Andrew?
Yes, Chair. Just in terms of 9C, my understanding is that Michael Barlow email went to all of us. So, just like yourself, I will declare that I received that email, but I don't think that any more than that. It was just something that came to our email. I did nothing with it. I wanted to read it and note it.
That's fair enough. Abby will note that it did go to all members of the committee. Gary?
Yeah, I was just going to say ditto, Chair. Yeah, I received that email.
Are there any other declarations of interest apart from the Michael Barlow letter? Good. We'll move on then to minutes of the previous meeting. That should be on page 11 or thereabouts. The numbering in the papers is a little out of kilter. Page 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. If there are no matters arising, and members are happy to approve them as a correct record. Thank you very much. We'll move on now to item 6, site visits. The date of the next one is to be advised, but it will almost certainly be the day before the next meeting of the Planning Committee. Item 7, we now come on to tree preservation order number 496 at the Bungalow, 21 Greno Gate in Sheffield, S35 8NY. Yes, can I ask you to introduce yourself, please, Jonathan?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Galley and I am the Community Tree Officer in planning, mainly looking after the north of the city. So today I'm seeking confirmation of TPO number 496 at the Bungalow, Greno side. Tree Preservation Order number 496 was made on the 2nd of September 2025 to protect 2 mature oak trees and 3 mature beech trees, referenced as T1 to T5, at the Bungalow, 21 Greno Gate, S35 8NY. A copy of the order with its accompanying map is attached as Appendix A of the committee report. The Council, acting as local planning authority, received a notice under Section 211 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, giving notification of intended works to fell 3 mature oak trees and 3 mature beech trees at the address. The Council's Community Tree Officer visited site on the 15th of August 2025 to carry out an amenity assessment of the trees using the tree evaluation method for preservation orders, TEMPO. A copy of the assessment can be viewed in Appendix B, and a detailed discussion of the amenity provided is contained within the committee report, as well as images of the trees in Appendix D. The result of the site visit was that the 5 trees within the order were assessed as providing significant amenity to the area. 1 tree was excluded due to its poor condition. The carrying out of the works described in the Section 211 notice would result in the unacceptable loss of the amenity provided by the trees. Having regard to the reasons set out in that notice, the works could not be justified and a TPO was deemed appropriate to ensure their long-term retention and protection. It was therefore considered expedient in the interest of amenity for TPO 496 to be made. 1 duly made objection to the TPO has been submitted to the Council. The points of objection, which can be seen in Appendix C of the report, are summarised as follows, along with my responses. 1. Lack of public amenity value. The objector stated that the trees are located on private land and are not highly visible to the public. Therefore, their impact on the wider area is minimal. The officer response: the amenity value of the trees has been assessed using a proper system of amenity evaluation and by an officer with the appropriate experience and qualifications to undertake such an assessment. The amenity assessment considers not only visibility, but a range of factors including the tree's condition, suitable retention span, and contribution to the character of the conservation area. The trees are referenced within the Grenoside Conservation Area's appraisal and management plan as detailed within the report. As the Section 211 notice has been served to the Council indicating the intention to carry out works that were assessed as posing significant harm to the amenity of the area, a TPO is deemed as expedient to prevent these works from being carried out. 2. The future management of the trees. Concerns are raised by the objector about the order providing a barrier to reasonable tree management, especially as the trees are within close proximity to the dwelling. The officer response: a TPO does not prevent reasonable management of trees, but ensures that any work is subject to appropriate oversight to safeguard public amenity. Following the TPO being made, consultation between the property owner, their arborist acting as an agent, and the Council's Community Tree Officer has taken place, and works that meet the standard of good arboricultural practice and do not pose a significant harm to public amenity have been agreed on, submitted via a planning application, and subsequently carried out. This demonstrates the Council's commitment to collaborating with the owners of protected trees, providing significant amenity value, but also supporting the retention of valuable trees whilst balancing individual rights. In conclusion, as this TPO was made in response to a submitted Section 211 notice, should the TPO not be confirmed, the notice may be carried out, which would result in 5 trees being open to removal. Therefore, my recommendation is that TPO 496 is confirmed without modification. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. We've got no speakers on this, so we'll move to member questions. Do members have any questions on this? Okay. No questions. Do members have any comments they wish to make? In that case, we'll move to a vote. Can I see all those in favour of the officer recommendation, please? That is unanimous. Thank you all very much. We now move on to item 8, Tree Preservation Order number 498, Highcliffe Social Club at 24 Highcliffe Drive. That's in S11 7LU. So, who do we have speaking on? Sam. Simon. Sorry, Simon. Off you go.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Simon Faramond, and I am the Community Tree Officer who deals with planning-related matters to trees in the south of the city. This afternoon, I am seeking confirmation of TPO 498 for trees at 24 Highcliffe Drive. The TPO was made on the 4th of September 2025 to protect the woodland W1 within the marked area and ash tree T1 on the slide on the left. A copy of the order with its accompanying map is attached as Appendix A in the report. On the 11th of August, the planning officer within the council requested that trees on the site be assessed of their suitability for protection with the TPO, following on from receipt of a request for pre-application advice concerning demolition of the existing building and construction of a block of flats. The proposed plans required the removal of a row of mature sycamores to the south of the existing building. Without any form of protection such as that afforded by being within a conservation area or protected by an existing TPO, and pending an assessment of their condition and suitability for a TPO, there was concern that these trees could potentially be preemptively removed if they were to become a significant constraint for the proposed development. The Council's community tree officers visited the site on the 14th of August to assess the trees for suitability for a TPO. A public footpath connecting Highcliffe Drive to High Stores Road runs along the eastern and northern boundaries of the site. This appears to be well used at the time of the visit, likely due to the proximity of the site to High Stores School, the Porter Valley and Highcliffe allotments. Small trees, vegetation and 2 mature ash are present on the opposite side of the path to the woodland. Of the 2 ash, only one was confirmed to be within the site boundary, T1 as described by the order, and was found to be in good structural and physiological condition with only minor signs of the impact of ash dieback disease. This is a prominent mature tree when viewed from the footpath entrance on High Stores Road. Although the trees within the woodland are individually of low or average quality, their highest value is collectively as a woodland. The area is likely to have developed from disused individual garden plots or allotments, but several early mature and mature trees have now established from a variety of native broadleaf species. The scrub and ground flora is also dense and inaccessible in places, which provides excellent habitat for mammal and potentially reptile species. The most valuable trees, in terms of individual quality, public visibility and ecological value as a transitional habitat zone, are the row of sycamores immediately adjacent to the southern side of the building. Removal of these, as required by the proposed development, would not only result in the loss of some of the highest amenity and quality trees, but would also remove trees which make some of the greatest ecological contribution to the woodland. The woodland also makes a valuable contribution to the landscape by creating a suburban nature reserve of significant amenity value. The public footpath which runs along the boundary affords a unique opportunity for this asset to be appreciated and enjoyed by the public, an aspect which is particularly significant for the young people using the route to attend the local school. Loss or even degradation of this feature would have a significant negative impact on the local area and community. The Council, acting as local planning authority, may protect trees on development sites via planning conditions or TPO. A previous version of the government guidance states that LPA should decide in each case whether trees should be safeguarded by using a planning condition or TPO or both. In the Secretary of State's view, however, it is not reasonable to use conditions as a means of securing long-term protection of trees when TPOs are available for this purpose. The current guidance does not repeat this, but equally does not recommend against the use of TPOs in the same circumstances to secure the long-term protection of trees. It is therefore open to the Council to make a TPO where appropriate for said purposes. A tree evaluation method for preservation orders, a tempo assessment, was carried out, which scored the woodland W1 with 15 points and the ash tree T1 with 13 points. The assessment produced a recommendation for protection, and it was therefore considered expedient in the interest of amenity to protect the woodland and individual tree by making an order. One duly made objection to the TPO and 2 representations in favour were received, and these can be found in Appendix C of the report. The objection is summarised as followed, with officer responses. Visibility alone is insufficient justification for an order. Officer response. While visibility is a consideration, a holistic assessment of the trees is undertaken and their wider value considered. The amenity value of the trees has been assessed using a proper system of amenity evaluation and by an officer with the appropriate experience and qualifications to undertake such an assessment. Using this system and drawing on the expert opinion of the officer who considered a range of factors, the trees were found to have the requisite amenity value to justify protection with an order. Tempo is not a structured system of amenity valuation. Officer response. Tempo is described by the author as a field guide to decision making containing an amenity assessment, an expediency assessment and a decision guide. It is widely used by many local planning authorities as it covers all factors that the current government guidance states that local planning authorities should consider when assessing amenity. The amenity assessment is contained within Part 1 of the form, and where trees fulfil this part, they are therefore shown to have sufficient amenity value to be considered suitable for protection, and then they move on to Part 2 of the assessment, where it is considered if they are expedient enough, if there is expediency to make trees subject to an order. Point 3, T1 is not a tree that deserves TPO protection. Officer response. As with W1, T1 was assessed using tempo, scored a total of 13 points, and the TPO deemed defensible by the assessment and the officer's judgment as a result. Point 4, W1 is not a woodland. Officer response. As stated in the objection, the National Planning Policy Framework and Supplementary Planning Guidance do not define the term woodland, so it is not possible for W1 to meet a government definition as none exist. Additionally, the objector makes the conclusion in their own tree survey to support the planning application that areas of trees could be retained as some sort of woodland, indicating the potential for the trees to be regarded as such. According to the Forestry Commission's 2024 National Forest Inventory, the area has been logged and categorised as a broadleaf woodland, and considering that the Forestry Commission is a government department, officers deem this to be as close to meeting an official definition as possible. Regardless, the reason the woodland classification has been ascribed to this area in the TPO is because that is where its current and future value lies, as previously discussed. This is also in accordance with the government guidance, which states, the woodland category's purpose is to safeguard a woodland as a whole, so it follows that, while some trees may lack individual merit, all trees within a woodland that merits protection are protected and made subject to the same provisions and exemptions. Point 5, the tempo appraisal has considered the group of trees as a collection of individuals. Officer response, the tempo assessment has assessed the trees in W1 as a woodland, as stated under tree details in the header of the assessment. Their conditions have been determined to be fair or satisfactory as indicated. Point 6, the trees have poor forms and selective removal would leave retained trees vulnerable to failure. Officer response, the trees have slender forms in the woodland interior and one-sided crowns at the edges, but these are typical forms for woodland trees which do not indicate they have impaired form. Poor form suggests that they have an increased risk of failure or limited safe retention span, and there is no evidence to suggest that this applies to trees of these forms in a woodland. They have developed their branch and root structures over the course of their lives, and as self-optimizing organisms, this is done to reach an acclimated state for the growing environment. For woodland trees that are genuinely of poor form or that show indicators of an increased risk of failure, it would be entirely reasonable to remove selected poorer specimens for the benefit of others without detriment. This is a routine practice for good silvicultural management called thinning. Point 7, this TPO is more likely to discourage than encourage good tree management. Officer response. A TPO does not prevent responsible management of trees and woodlands, but ensures that any work is subject to appropriate oversight to safeguard public amenity. The process of applying for consent to carry out works to a TPO protected woodland does not incur a fee, and it serves to control the quality and impact of the work to prevent disproportionate harm to high amenity value trees. Additionally, exemptions exist which mean the authority's consent is not required to carry out certain work to trees. This includes urgent work to remove immediate risk of harm and work to dead trees and branches. The Council encourages property owners to take expert advice to inform their decision making and regularly provides information on finding reliable arboriculturalists to help property owners. This advice forms the basis for supporting evidence in subsequent application to work on any trees or woodlands protected by an order. Point 8, it is not expedient to protect the trees as they are not under threat. Officer response, trees which are not subject to a TPO and not within a conservation area might be preemptively removed. Whether it is practical to do so can factor into consideration of whether it is expedient to make an order. In this case, the trees could be felled and material removed once the site is under development, so the current state of the access would not be restricted insofar as that is concerned. The likelihood of this occurring is a factor in favour of protecting trees of worth so as to prevent their removal, but is not the only factor. In some cases, the Council may take the view that certain trees are at risk as a result of future development and post-development pressures, and may consider, where this is in the interest of amenity, that it is expedient to make the order. Point 9, the building could not be demolished without affecting the adjacent trees. The trees are impossible to retain in their current form. Officer response, demolishing buildings adjacent to trees, even at this proximity, can be successfully carried out on development sites if expert arboricultural advice and guidance is provided and adhered to. The British Standard, which provides processes and recommendations for trees on development sites, has a section of guidance specifically for this scenario. Regardless, a TPO cannot prevent a planning application. If permission is granted and if the implementation of that permission requires the removal of trees under the protection of a TPO, the authority's consent is not required for these works. In closing, my recommendation is that the TPO is confirmed without modification to protect these trees, which make a valuable contribution to the current and future amenity of the local area.
Thank you, Simon. We have one speaker who's been invited. That's Bill Anderson, and you want to speak against the proposed application. Okay. Do you know how to switch on the...
That one?
Yep, you've got
Jolly
it.
good.
You've got up to 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. In December last year, I appeared before this committee to object to another tree preservation order. I was sufficiently annoyed by the way the matter was considered to make a complaint. The complaint was handed to a manager within the planning department who was clearly not familiar with TPO rules, so she rejected my complaint. I elevated it to a level 2 complaint, and it was then handed to a director, Mr. Stewart, who also, extremely politely, rejected my complaint. This took 8 months. Mr. Stewart did, however, accept one of my comments and promised to amend the training that this committee receives. So last week, on hearing that this TPO was to be discussed at this meeting, I called Mr. Stewart's personal assistant to find out if his promise had been acted upon. As of this morning, I have not received any reply. The amended training required is to emphasise that the government guidance, which we all have to follow, states quite clearly that visibility alone is insufficient justification for a tree preservation order. This is a fairly crucial factor, and you will note that agenda item 8 contains in its introduction the term visual amenity value. It's almost 20 years since I first pointed this out in an objection to a tree preservation order. For a tree to justify TPO protection, it must be more than merely visible. I think this needs to be emphasised, and so I've repeated it. We should look upon the government guidance not just as guidance, it is the Secretary of State's understanding of what the law means. The committee report focuses very much on visibility and really tells us nothing about the trees other than that they can be seen. While it does mention other factors such as wildlife habitat, none of these benefits are much different to those found in the adjacent domestic garden. The benefits are not out of the ordinary and should not be regarded as unusually significant. I pointed out that the trees on this site do not amount to semi-natural ancient woodland, and that the group does not meet any definition of woodland contained in the Planning Act. The report states that there is no government definition, but actually this is wrong. In July last year, the Forestry Commission published a definition of woodland and reasoned that for most purposes a woodland needed to be at least half a hectare. This site, I've only measured it from Google, but as far as the best I can do is make it 2,000 square metres, so not even half a hectare. The report refers to the National Forest Inventory, which also seems to be wrong. The plan on the NFI shows woodland extending over at least a dozen gardens, and as gardens are generally deemed not to be woodland, this is quite clearly wrong. The report goes on to state that a TPO does not impair good management. While this is true, it does make it more expensive. A TPO application is fairly straightforward for those of us who are familiar with the planning portal, but for most householders it is confusing. A company called Tree Law UK charged £600 for making a TPO application, a fee that would persuade many tree owners not to bother. I should also point out here that the tempo appraisal that accompanied the TPO caveated its appraisal with the need for ongoing management. So on the one hand, the tempo appraisal is stating that the group of trees needs management, and on the other, is stating that the group of trees needs management if it's to be a viable feature for decades to come. And on the other hand, it's making this management even more expensive than it needs to be. I don't know if members are aware, but while many people might assume that a tree that's worthy of a TPO is also worthy of a grant to support its maintenance, this is very much not the case. The tempo system, according to the report, is widely used by local planning authorities, and I have to say this is true. However, it's mostly used because it's easy to make any tree score over the TPO defensible threshold. In this case, we can see that the ash tree only reached the threshold because it got 3 points for being under threat. Had it scored a single point for precautionary only, it would have scored does not merit TPO. Expediency is not a function of value. Something does not increase in value just because somebody is tired of the something. Tempo is not a system of amenity valuation and impossible to apply in many of the situations where the government guidance requires officers to undertake an amenity valuation. The surviving author of Tempo has currently withdrawn it from his website as he's fed up of dealing with queries from tree officers who have misapplied it. I really don't know why the council tree officers have not devised their own system of amenity valuation. They're fully capable of doing so, and if they did that, they could make sure it complied with the government guidance.
Simon, you have just gone over your 5 minutes. I should have let you know. Sorry, Bill.
Bill, yeah.
I apologise. But yeah, I should
You
have
want
given
the last
you
paragraph?
a bit of notice.
No, all right.
Thank you. Do you have any, do you wish to respond to the speaker's remarks?
Yes, I do. I'll try to cover as many as possible. With regard to the comment about the members' training, we did actually respond to that this week, but I don't know how it didn't obviously get to you. But we do have it clearly in the training that visibility is considered, but visibility alone does not warrant an order. And it is discussed within the report. Yes, the trees are visibility or have different levels of visibility, but they also have other values as stated. As you say, there's no definition of woodland. I've not heard of this half a hectare thing. And although you may disagree with the findings of the Forestry Commission, they've included the woodland in the map and defined it as such. So, I mean, yeah, that's all we can go on as a government body making that decision. And as discussed in the report, that map is not the only reason that the woodland classification is used. It's because that's how the value of the trees are as a woodland and not as individual or groups of trees. And there's even government guidance of how to use the woodland classification, which states exactly those things. It's the collective value of the trees. I disagree with it being costly to make TPO applications. As an officer who deals with all those TPO applications, we regularly receive them from homeowners without issue, and we work with homeowners to facilitate this process and ensure that extra costs aren't incurred by going to expensive consultants or wherever that £600 was quoted from. As stated previously in the report, tempo it's only a structure for making the assessment. It heavily relies on officer experience and judgment. And it's split into two parts, as stated previously as well. The first part is the amenity evaluation. Only then does it go on to qualify for the expediency evaluation, which is a separate section. So the expediency value adds nothing to the amenity value. That is a self-contained part of the assessment. So it doesn't score any extra for the level of expediency for the order. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. Are there any questions from members at this point? Glynis.
Yes, thank you, Simon. Can I ask, when we've done training before about TPOs, there's been sort of a thing about where you would only consider the age of the tree and you're going on the girth of the trunk. Well, some of these trees look quite thin to me. Do you know how old they are?
Yeah, how long's a piece of string? It's always a bit tricky with a tree. We work on kind of retention spans rather than, I mean, older trees do have an inherent increased value because they have historic value, and then that also increases their size as well if they are big old trees. But they don't have to be old to have sufficient amenity value, even especially when they're collectively considered in a group like this. It is a relatively young woodland, but it has the potential to be a very valuable feature and become a mature woodland if retained in its current form.
I have a question for you, Simon. This is an ash tree, and as we know, nationally, ash dieback has infected a lot of ash trees across the country. It's particularly noticeable in places like Munsell Dale, in the Peak District, where you see a lot of the trees that have withered. I'm just wondering, with this tree, it looks like it's got the potential to survive this, what do you call it, an illness, sickness?
Yeah, I did mention it briefly in the main body of the report, but in general in Sheffield we have not intense, dense populations of ash tree like in Munsell Dale, where the effect of the disease with its kind of, it's basically self-infecting each time, and it's much more concentrated like that. But in Sheffield we removed a lot of trees in the last kind of 10-15 years due to the disease, but it seems to have plateaued quite significantly, and a lot of trees have declined a little bit and then been stable for many years. And I think that's been seen across the country in similar areas. And trees like this, they show a little bit of decline, but really they have the potential to live out their full lives if there are no secondary factors that affect them.
Thank you for that. Because if the disease were to take hold at a later date, would that change the position with the TPO, where the tree is clearly showing evidence of decline?
Yeah, like with any trees, as I said, there's exemptions for any trees that become dangerous, but also if we receive an application for a tree that is in just a poor state or showing signs of decline, it isn't imminently dangerous, so it doesn't qualify for one of the exemptions, then we assess that application and we take a reasonable approach to these things. We're just making sure that the work is controlled and within good arboricultural practices, really.
Thank you. If there are no further questions from members, can I have comments from members? I see no one wanting to comment. So we will move to a vote. Can I see all those in favour of the recommendation? That vote is unanimous. Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Bill, for coming along to speak. I think we'll get someone to have a conversation with the director, though, in view of your comments. Move on now to item 9, applications under various acts and regulations, and we have 3 applications to hear today. The first, item 9A, planning application number 25/03185/CHU, and that's at the address of 6 Middlecliff Rise, Sheffield, S20 7HW. And Councillor Glynis Chapman is leaving us for this item. Thank you. Jacob, do you want to present?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll just wait for the slides to come up. Okay. So this planning application seeks permission for the use of an existing dwelling house to provide assisted living accommodation for up to 3 children, with resident staff being present on a rota basis. The application is presented to Planning Committee due to significant public interest, and there have been objections received from 24 households, which I'll address later in the presentation. The property is located in the Waterthorpe area, on a typical suburban street. It's a detached house with an existing driveway and lawn to the front and a paved garden to the rear, and it's previously received a substantial 2-storey rear extension. This is a photo of the front of the house, showing the front lawn in front of the building and the existing paved parking area and garage. And then this photo is taken from outside the property facing west on Middlecliff Rise towards the junction with Thorpe Drive. And then this photo is looking straight out from the front of the property towards the junction with Middlecliff Close. So the floor plans show that there will be no external alterations to the house, and the only internal alterations would be the insertion of a partition wall at ground floor to create a staff office or bedroom, and the removal of a wall at first floor to merge 2 small bedrooms into 1 larger room, but none of those alterations in themselves require planning permission, so the application is for the change of use only. In terms of staffing, there would generally be 3 staff present in the daytime, with 2 at night, and shifts would be on a broadly 48-hour rota. This is the proposed site plan. So the only external change would be the extension of the driveway to ensure that there is off-street parking for at least 3 cars. In isolation, that element also wouldn't require planning permission, subject to the use of permeable paving, but it's shown on the plans as the applicant is committed to increasing the parking provision for staff, and it's also included in the recommendation that there will be a condition to secure that parking before the use commences. In terms of the material planning considerations, the only things really to consider here are the principle of the use of the building, residential amenity and highway safety. Objections have been received on all 3 grounds, and there are also other objections that have been received relating to non-material matters such as property values and concerns about management and safety relating to kind of the identity of the people that will be looked after at this home. So I think it's just important to note that the management of the facility is subject to separate legislation and regulation via Ofsted, and that's not a material planning consideration. So this decision should be made under the assumption that the operators are complying with all other best practice requirements and legislation. In terms of land use, the site's located in a housing area on the Unitary Development Plan proposals map, and residential uses are supported in principle, including both market housing and care facilities. Paragraph 63 of the National Planning Policy Framework also seeks to meet the needs of groups with specific housing requirements. So this application would support that aim. In terms of residential amenity, the floor plans demonstrate 3 well-sized bedrooms for the residents, plus generous shared living accommodation and dedicated staff facilities. The rear garden is slightly smaller than we might normally expect for a property of this size, but it currently functions as a 5-bed home with a similar level of occupancy, so there's no real increased pressure on outdoor amenity space, and there are also local green spaces nearby. In terms of neighbouring amenity, again, there's no reason to assume that a well-managed facility would create any greater noise disturbance or risk of safety issues compared to a normal family home, given that the occupancy would be similar, and the proposal is to create a family-like environment. We can't make any assumptions about the type of residents to be housed there, and it is expected that staff would be trained to deal with any behavioural issues that might worry residents. Any increase in comings and goings due to visiting professionals and shift handovers would be minimal and wouldn't create any significant increased disturbance. In terms of highway safety, the driveway extension ensures that there'd be enough parking space for 2 staff members plus any visiting professionals and daytime staff members. And there's also plenty of on-street parking in the event that the driveway is full, at limited periods such as shift handovers. Additional comings and goings again would be minimal and wouldn't increase traffic to the extent that would put pressure on junctions or create any pedestrian safety issues, and there are no highways objections. So for those reasons, the proposal is considered to have very little impact on the local area and to be in accordance with national and local policies, so the application is recommended for approval. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Jacob. We have one speaker today, and they are speaking for the application, and that is Kat Rothwell. If you'd like to come to the desk with a microphone. Do you know how to switch it on? Bring up the red
This button,
light.
you can hear me?
That's it, you've done it. And you have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Kat Rothwell, and I'm here on behalf of Shorepath Homes. I want to keep our remarks brief, but also clear and reassuring, particularly for local residents who may have concerns. So I've looked after children for around 20 years in various roles, including being a frontline worker in a children's home. I've managed several accommodation provisions for young people, and I've looked after children in my own home as a foster carer. I know Waterthorpe well. I grew up locally, and my mum lives just around the corner. I know that it's a great place to grow up as a child, and there's lots of opportunities to learn and play and make friends and discover independence. I'm a parent and I have my own family. I understand very personally the instinct to protect children and to want safe and settled neighbourhoods. I've spent years visiting and quality assuring hundreds of children's homes across the country. I've seen what good care looks like, and I know the difference it makes when a home is well run, well supervised and rooted in its community. And that's the standard we're committed to here. The children who live in this home are typically aged between about 8 and 13. They're not children who, for a variety of reasons, can live safely with their own families. They're not defined by bad behaviour or criminality. They're defined by loss and instability and a need to be cared for. In day-to-day terms, they're just like any other children in the community. They go to school, they have homework, they play football or enjoy arts and crafts, they go to clubs, they argue about screen time, and they worry about the same things that children their age worry about. The difference is that they need consistent, trained adults around them to provide that safety and structure and reassurance that we will do. The home's not an institution, it's a normal family home shared with caring adults whose job is to provide stability and positive role modelling. The aim is always to help children feel safe, settle into ordinary routines and build the confidence and skills they need to thrive. Shorepath Homes is an Ofsted regulated care provider, so that means that our work, our staff and our homes are inspected to some of the highest standards in the country, not only in terms of care and safeguarding of children, but how our properties are managed and how we operate within local communities. We fully recognise that change can feel unsettling, especially when it involves children's services, and that's why we place strong emphasis on being good neighbours, maintaining the property well, managing parking and staffing responsibly, and ensuring that clear lines of communication are there with the community. We're not just asking for permission to use a building differently, we're asking to provide a stable home for a small number of young children who genuinely need one, in a way that's safe and discreet and respectful of the area. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Kat. Well within the 5 minutes. Thank you. We'll invite you back. Do members have any questions? Andrew.
Yes, Chair. We're here again to talk about the difference between C3P, C3 brackets B, and C2, and the fact that this property is C2 because the staff would, their movements would be different to, we would expect adults in a C3A household. I mean, the Town and Country Planning Act 1987 as amended, has that been amended in light of all the more recent Children's Acts and all the more recent MPPFs? I just feel that we're a bit of an oddment as a planning authority, the way we're having this very vigorous enforcement of C2 being we need to have a planning application, we need to go through this detailed procedure. I mean, are we the authority are we the ones that are odd ones out, or are we in line with most other planning authorities? Thanks, Chair.
Jacob?
Recent changes to the use classes order haven't affected the residential brackets. C3 and C2 haven't changed. There have been other changes relating to commercial uses, but that's not relevant here. I think our approach is pretty consistent with other authorities across the country. It's not necessarily the local planning authority that is insisting on all of these uses requiring planning permission. We do receive other ones via lawful development certificate applications, seeking to establish that there is not a material change of use, and we have approved some of those. If we've got a planning application instead of a lawful development certificate application, then we have to assess it as such, and that's the situation that we're in here. I think it's correct to say that this particular proposal is for a C2 home rather than a C3B one, and that is, as you identified, because of the frequency of staff changeovers. It's not a permanent resident, it's not permanently resident carers, so that's the kind of the slight difference there. But there are also legal precedents. There's a North Devon case that's been heavily referred to, stating that just because you might say that it's in a use class, it doesn't necessarily mean that the change of use is material if it operates similarly, and that's why we've had some of those lawful development certificates approved. In this case, we've got a planning application, so we're assessing it against the policies that are relevant, so that's what the decision should really be based on.
So can I just check in terms of the guidance we give for providers of this, in terms of, do we advise them to go down the planning application route rather than a lawful development certificate, or do we give them advice of these are two routes to go down and it's their choice and they can take independent legal advice or commercial legal advice on which of those should be the route they should go down?
We always encourage the submission of a pre-application inquiry before a planning application or an LDC. If a pre-app was submitted, then the officer would usually take a look at whether they consider that change to be material, and they'd advise on the likely acceptability of either outcome. Obviously, pre-application doesn't prejudice the final application of the final outcome of the application, but an officer would give advice on procedurally what they consider to be appropriate. We don't have a pre-application inquiry in every case. Some applicants choose to just go ahead straight with the application. I think some applicants also might have a requirement from other bodies to get a planning permission, as opposed to a lawful development certificate, and they might have a requirement that the permission is for a C2 use class, and so they simply apply for that.
So you're saying sometimes it's because the funders for the development require it.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to kind of comment on the reasons that an applicant might choose a specific route when it's not been advised by us. It might be a funder, it might be a regulatory requirement. Either way, when we get the application, we assess it.
Thank you for clarifying that, Jacob. Richard, you have a question.
Thank you, Chair. Just a technical question, really. If for whatever reason this didn't work and somebody wanted to revert back to just a normal house, would they have to go for a change of use, or is that an automatic revert back?
Yes, I would have to actually check the general permitted development order, which does have permitted development rights. I've not seen one for C2 to C3 before, so I'm not quite sure actually off the top of my head. But I think in principle it's likely that it would need planning permission to change back to a family home. I mean, in terms of acceptability of that with reference to the policies that we've already discussed, I can't see a reason why that wouldn't be acceptable. And then indeed if this planning permission weren't implemented, then it would just simply remain as a C3 family home anyway.
And could I follow up with if it's wanted to change, for whatever reason, you said there was no longer a need for assisted living dwellings for children, that would be a great thing, wouldn't it? If somebody wanted to have an assisted living development for adults, would that need a further change of use, or does it come under the same one?
I suppose because this particular planning permission, we've recommended a condition which refers, it doesn't refer to children, it refers to 3 residents excluding staff. I'm just looking at condition 4. It's not in the description of the development, the word children, and it's not in the conditions. So I don't see any reason why it couldn't be cared for adults as well, based on that, legally speaking. I might want to check that with Vicky, actually. But yeah, there's nothing in the operative part of the permission which says it must be children.
I think we're in danger of straying away from the application in hand, and we have had the speaker explain to us that this is for children. But that could be picked up in another forum, I'd suggest. Are there any other member questions? Mark?
Yeah, it's been pointed out that this is the same size pretty well as a family unit. I think, have we any experience from previous places like this? Because I know other places have come before us, so there are other ones. In that the biggest difference to it being a family unit would be if there was a rapid fire sequence of different children coming and going every 3 months. Does this give a long-term home generally, or is it a place for rapid turnover of children? Thank you.
I think that would be a matter for the management, for the operator. It's not something we're seeking to control through conditions, and I don't see any particular reason to do that. I think if the facility is managed well, then it doesn't matter if the residents change every couple of months or every few years. It's operating in a way that is conducive to the residential character of the neighbourhood.
Are there any further questions? Can I have member comments? Henry?
Thank you, Chair. You used a really important phrase for me there, Jacob, which is normal family home. And as a corporate parent, as all members are, that is what I would like for our in-care children. I think to give much weight to concerns about property values or a local crime rate from children that we haven't even put in place yet would be to stigmatise a group that has already been stigmatised enough. So I won't be according those concerns a particular amount of weight, and I will be proud to support the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Gary?
Yes, thanks, Chair. For sitting on this planning board for nearly 25 years, I think it's really nice that we haven't got children's homes any longer, where we are moving out into communities like this, you know, and we've had some good results up and down round about Sheffield. And I think this is the way forward for organisations like yourself. So I think I'll be supporting this, Chair.
Thank you, Gary. Andrew, and then Marianne.
Yes, Chair, I'll be supporting this application. You know, the planning issues are, you know, the highways, the parking, the noise. As I say, I think for those reasons, I don't think a household of 3 looked after children and a couple of staff members who come and go, it's any different to a family home. I just think and I will support it as I have supported the 7 previous times. But we have to take each case on its merits. I mean, what I would ask, and I continue to ask, is I don't believe that these cases should take up our time in the way they do. We only have 7% of planning applications coming before the board, and they should be the strategic ones where there's a difficult policy decision or a strategic site or important change of use. And I feel that we're misusing the planning process here, that the law is very clear that we are corporate parents. We're not corporate parents when we sit here, because clearly we're here as planning councillors and we're making a decision on the merits of a planning case. But, you know, in other places, in other parts of the council, we are corporate parents. The council has decided we want to have small homes for looked after children. Those small homes need to be in residential areas across Sheffield. We need to make sure that that happens in appropriate manner, and the regulatory services, which are predominantly Ofsted, and you make sure that the quality of care for those children in our care is as good as it can be. And most of those issues are not planning matters, they are children's services matters, and they're not planning matters. So I think the process still needs looking at. As I say, I'll be supporting this case on the individual merits of this case. I think this is a good site for this home. And I heard the comments by the proposed provider, and that gave me some reassurance. But I know there's a regulatory system which will reinforce that. So I'm confident this is the way forward, and I'm happy to support this. The officer's recommendation to support this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. Marianne, then Mark.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for bringing this application. I think that the conversion of just 1 residential dwelling can help 3 looked after children, and that contributes to the availability of accommodation for young people who need a good home. So to me, it's clear this change of use seems sound and appropriate use of the site. So yeah, I'll be proud to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. Mark.
Clearly, we have a duty of care for the children of Sheffield. A family-sized unit like this is far, far better than children in an old-style institution. We saw on the site visit, this is a good neighbourhood to grow up in. It's a good neighbourhood for children to develop. I hope that the residents will feel proud that they are nurturing the children who will be in their community, and it is clearly a good community. So I will support this change of use.
Thank you, Mark. And Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm more than happy to support this application. I think it's great and good. My observation is, though, that without exception, everybody who's spoken about this has referred to children. And coming back to my earlier point, actually this application is for assisted living for anybody. And I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the case. It doesn't actually say that this is limited to children. I think there is a slight difference, there is a subtle difference, and I think it's a shame that we aren't a bit more specific in our proposal.
Well, I'd understood Kat to say that this was specifically for children. Is that correct? Does your organisation also deal with care for adults?
We have another part of the organisation that works with young people, which can be up to the age of 21, but not in this home. This is specifically for children.
Thank you. So the matter would only arise then if the home were given up and sold on, wouldn't it? So perhaps Jacob could explain what would happen in that case. But I mean, that's down the tracks, isn't it? That's in the future.
Yes.
We're dealing with an application as it is.
I suppose the application needs to be assessed on its own merits rather than with regard to a specific operator, which I think is maybe what you're trying to get at, Councillor Williams. And the question is, could it change to an adult supporting living facility in future? Everything that's been submitted with the application is very clear that it would be about children's care. The submission documents make that clear. They give an age range. They talk about providing a family-like environment. I guess procedurally, though, we've not got reference to children in the description of the development. So there's a question about the lawfulness of it being adults in the future. I might ask Vicky to comment on that. There could be the option to condition it being carried out in accordance with the management statement that has been submitted, if members wanted to add that condition. Again, it's whether that meets kind of the tests for reasonableness in the MPPF.
Thank you, Chair.
One for Vicky there.
My understanding is that there is permitted development rights here, and that does deal with where you've got an application for something under a use class. Anything under that use class can then come forward in the future. You can restrict permitted development rights where reasonable to do so. I think that there'll be some guidance that I haven't got in front of me at the moment on that. But if you were to put something in the conditions about relating it to children, then it would mean that it would it would require another permission to change it to adults. But where you do put a condition on, or where you are looking to restrict permitted development rights, you should be doing that for a planning reason. So whilst it may operationally be different and have some different considerations, are the planning differences enough to warrant limiting this permission in that type of way, is what I would put to yourselves.
Nikki.
Coming back on what Vicky helpfully said there, I suppose if they're all adults living in the house, there could be an implication for parking and for having more vehicles outside, so there could be an effect on highways, which is a material consideration, is it not?
It is, and I'm sort of assessing something on the spot here, but I would also think it less likely that all residents would have a car if they're adults that are needing to be in a supported living facility. And I think from the site visit yesterday and from the photos that the case officer took, it's quite clear to see that generally the street is not congested with parked cars. So if there were another couple of parked cars, would that necessarily create enough of a highway safety issue that then it would be reasonable to impose a condition limiting the type of people that can live there? I'm not sure I would necessarily think so.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay,
just, I suppose, it seems like so there would be 3 adults plus 2 to 3 members of staff. So quite likely that any visitors could be in cars as well, but I suppose that would be the same for children, although not from peers, I suppose. Are there any differences in terms of
I know the regulations for this were probably under Ofsted, but in terms of if this was for adults, the way the space is used within the house in terms of adults living together.
I wouldn't want to comment on that. I think that would be an Ofsted issue. I would say the bedrooms are reasonably sized, probably for adult bedrooms. I guess as well, I mean, we're talking very speculatively about a hypothetical scenario, and it's probably worth considering the likelihood of that scenario. From my own professional experience, when we see proposals for adult supported living, it's more common that they're kind of separate units that might have a kind of separate staff unit, so they'd be living more independently than a family environment. So I just question how likely it is that actually this use is transferable to that kind of scenario. That's not to say it's impossible. It's whether it's a reasonable concern that would necessitate the imposition of a planning condition relating to the type of people that can live there.
I think we're in danger of going off topic here, and we have to deal with the application that's in front of us, and it has been made clear to us that it is for looked after children in a family setting.
If I may, Mike.
You may.
I think there could be other reasons for conditioning compliance with the submitted documentation in terms of the management and kind of shift patterns, which might relate to the shift handovers being, say, 48-hour periods rather than comings and goings every hour or so. So there might be other reasons that members may feel that the information provided should be adhered to, rather than just trying to stop it being an adult's home. So I'm not necessarily saying I don't think a condition requiring that would meet the tests of reasonableness and necessity. I think a condition limiting it to children might be different, but again, I don't know what you think, Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. As I said, the submission of the management plan, obviously you could condition that if you've got concerns that it must be adhered to in order for it to be acceptable in planning terms. Equally, you have got a condition there that says it should accommodate a maximum of 3 residents, and you could put in under the age of 18 if you think there are genuine planning reasons why you're concerned about whether the impacts of it being an adult assisted living home have not been detailed in the report. I would, obviously in terms of the planning, weighing up the planning issues, I do acknowledge that the planning officer is saying in terms of an adult assisted living development, how those planning merits may be different to this one are quite small, I think, in nature potentially, and that may be a reason why, if tested on appeal, the condition might struggle to meet those 6 tests. Obviously, in terms of the operational, how the site plans to operate with that management plan, that likely will contain more information and more issues, such as the handover of staff and how often people are going to be moving around. May be something that's probably got more planning merits to it rather than the age of the people within the home. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vicky. So I've got 2 suggestions there. Are members minded to put in a condition related to the management plan that would condition it more around the comings and goings?
I mean, personally, I think so. And I only say that because, there has been a lot of concern raised by residents, but the proposal is very much geared up through its plan for children. So why not reflect that in the final decision? I mean, I would doubt that you would appeal against that. You might want to, but based on what you've said, what your company does, I can't, in my own mind, think you would. So I'm less concerned about that. But I just think the residents think they're getting one thing. It would be nice for that to be the one thing. That's my.
I see what you're saying. Can I take it that you are proposing that? So you would be seeking a seconder? And you've got Nikki, who's more than happy to second that proposal.
Chair, can we just have a clarification on what the proposal is there in terms of which condition is potentially being amended or added? Thank
It
you.
was the one relating to the management plan that you put
Chair.
forward, which you recommended more than the other one.
I obviously wouldn't like the word recommended to be there. Just in terms of meeting the 6 tests, I think it's a stronger position for the committee to take. Obviously, you have got a proposer and a seconder there. You just need a show of hands to add that in. Thank you.
Can I see a show of hands? And those against? Abstentions? That is carried as a majority vote. Okay, can we move to add that to the main recommendation in favour of this application? Can I see all those in favour? And that is unanimous. Thank you all members. Yes, I'm going to propose that we have a 10-minute comfort break. We are actually doing better than I expected at this time. I shouldn't say that really, should I? If people can come back for 3:25, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
We're missing Kate. Is Casey's not back?
Oh, no, he's not. Sorry, we'll just hang on a bit longer for Case. Okay, we'll reconvene now. Thank you for your patience. We're moving on now to item 9B, planning application number 25/02698/full, and that's land at the northwest of London Road and Broadfield Road in Sheffield 8, and that can be found on page 75 of your papers. So, Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So, the site is a currently vacant site located on London Road, at its junction with Bradfield Road, and it also has a frontage onto Chipping House Road, as you can see on the slide. Recent changes to the junction layout, which you can kind of tell from the red line of the planning application boundary overlaid on the aerial. That aerial is pre-alteration to the junction. Have included the demolition of the former buildings on the site and the provision of a new access, which is just roughly where that kind of elbow is on the right-hand side of the or eastern side of the red line. The site's got commercial neighbours to the east, south, and west, but 2-storey terrace dwellings to the north on Chipping House Road. So just quickly flick it. There's quite a number of these images, and there are a lot of them on each page. So I won't talk through them, but these just give you an indication of the area. These are commercial frontages with the access. You can see the access there. Actually, sorry, top right-hand image and bottom right-hand image in particular. They're the newly constructed access. And these are general images, unfortunately taken largely through Harris fencing, such was the time of the officer's visit. That looks across the site to the Chipping House Road dwellings, the 2-storey typical Sheffield traditional properties. Sorry, the right-hand screen seems to, it's come back. And these are commercial properties opposite the site. That is those are largely views taken from Chipping House Road, so the site currently has a pretty substantial red brick wall across much of that frontage that would be removed as part of the application. And that is a further aerial view. So the development plan, unit development plan allocation is split between a fringe industry and business site allocation on roughly 70% of the site and a local shopping centre on 30%. The latter, which is the portion that fronts London Road. So in other words, the fringe industry and business area, which is the majority of the site, is towards the rear, towards the Chipping House Road frontage. The buildings which provided or formed the basis for the shopping allocation have now been demolished, as you can see from the image there. And the emerging plan, although it can be given limited weight at the moment, allocates the whole site as a general employment zone, indicating the direction of travel away from shopping on that site. The proposal is for a drive-through restaurant fast food outlet, which is accessed from London Road, with car parking central to the site that you can see there, and the building at the rear, with a drive-through circulation lane around both the car park and the building. There is frontage landscaping to London Road with an average depth of approximately 5 metres, and to a much lesser extent onto the Chipping House Road frontage with an average depth of about 1.5 metres, although you can see it's more like kind of 2.5 in portions and then very little in the rest. The building has a footprint, to give you some context, of 29 metres by 10 metres, and it has a height of 6.1 metres. I'll skip through these because they're quite similar. They're the elevations of the building. You can see it's got a flat roof there with external finishes of red brick and a grey engineering brick. There's been significant public interest in the application, with approximately 50 letters of support, 200 objecting, and the details of that are set out in the report. As a town centre use in MPPF terms, that is located outside an existing centre, a sequential test needs to be applied. That's been done, and the applicant has demonstrated that there are no other sequentially preferable sites available that would serve this facility. Flood risk is also a constraint to the site, requires a sequential approach. The site lies within several flood zones, 3B, which is a functional floodplain, 3A, which is a high probability of flooding, and flood zone 2, which is a medium probability. The access and the car park are in 3A, and the building is in 2. And the 3B functional floodplain is limited to the landscape frontage, essentially, a very small not all of the landscape frontage, and a very small portion of the footway on the entrance into the site on the left-hand side. So it doesn't affect the developable area. A flood risk sequential testing has been undertaken, and that confirms that there are no sequentially preferable sites that are available to accommodate the development in flood risk terms. The Environment Agency have in fact raised an objection as the 3B, in relation to the site flood zone 3B portion of the site. However, the flood risk assessment demonstrates that the building is at a higher level than flood levels, and there is no development or raising of levels taking place in flood zone 3B. So we've reviewed that in some detail internally, and we actually agree with the applicant's consultants that it would be unreasonable to resist permission on the basis of that objection on flood risk grounds. The proposal, as I said, involves the provision of fast food within a drive-through takeaway with an eating element as well. And paragraph 97 of the MPPF requires LPAs to refuse such applications under Part A, which is within walking distance of schools and other places where young people congregate, unless the location is in a designated town centre. If you remember, part of the site is within a local shopping centre, and that qualifies as a town centre in MPPF terms, as the document defines that as including district and local centres. So whilst the site access is in the local centre, and the landscaping and some of the car parking, the building itself is located in the fringe industry and business area, and so the MPPF, in our view, directs refusal on those grounds. Part B to paragraph 97 says that LPA's planning authorities should refuse an application where there's evidence that a concentration of such uses is having an adverse impact on local health. Public Health have advised on this application and identify several locations within walking distance of the site, including Lowfield School, which is approximately a 3-minute walk from the entrance to the site on Chipping House Road. And in total, 3 schools and 11 other locations within 800 metres of the site that could reasonably be considered to attract large numbers of gatherings of children or used by children. Public Health also advised that based on the latest data, which is to 2024, that by year 6, 40% of children in the relevant geographical area, that's roughly in a range of 2,000 to 6,000 households in the vicinity, are considered overweight or obese, and that's compared with a national average of 36% and a Sheffield average of 38%. And Public Health also confirm that the area has relatively high deprivation, and that McDonald's offers low-cost food, which they consider to be not McDonald's, but Public Health consider to be unhealthy and with low nutritional value and with large portion incentives. And given all this, officers consider that there is a clear conflict here with paragraph 97A and B that leads us to a refusal recommendation. And we also consider that whilst acknowledging the flood risk constraints of the site, the development presents a poor urban design solution. There is landscaping to London Road, which could be considered a betterment, but beyond that is a sea of parking and circulation space in very prominent view on an arterial route, strategic road in and out of the city. And the building is for want of a better expression, shoved to the rear of the site. It lacks visual interest, we feel. I'll just remind you of the images. With a very utilitarian form, and it turns its back and relates poorly to Chipping House Road and that residential context, presenting an almost blank 30-metre by 6-metre wall that's separated by a drive-through lane with quite minimal landscaping. There are no other material considerations that present any areas of concern. So, acknowledging the benefits of the site's redevelopment, including job creation and investment, and a general overall improvement in its current appearance, the issues relating to paragraphs 97 of the MPPF and to the urban design considerations are considered to outweigh this, and therefore refusal is recommended. There's nothing within the supplementary report on this one, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. We have 3 speakers today, 2 speaking in favour and 1 against. We've got Councillor Nigat Basharat, who wishes to speak against this application. She is known to members, so I suppose we should make sure that DOI is noted. But if you'd like to come to the microphone, you have up to 5 minutes to speak. Might be the other button. It was working earlier.
Thank you. First of all, good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I am here to formally oppose this application on behalf of local parents, residents and businesses in Netheridge and Sharrow. And I just want to be clear that I'm not speaking in isolation. I have been out in the community speaking directly with parents, residents and local people who live, work and raise their children in this area. I am here today to bring their fears, their worries and their lived experience into this chamber so that decision makers hear them clearly. Many parents have told me they are deeply concerned about the impact this proposal would have on their children's health. Young people already congregate in this area and there are already 2 McDonald's outlets nearby. Adding another fast food drive-through so close to schools and community spaces, making unhealthy food even more accessible and normalised for our children. This does not support our shared ambition, Chair and Committee, to tackle obesity, diabetes and long-term health inequalities. It directly undermines it. Parents are asking me, what message are we sending to our young people when fast food is placed at the heart of their daily routes to school, worship and community life? As a councillor and as someone who cares deeply about the well-being of our young people, I believe we have a responsibility to do better. Residents have also raised serious concerns about traffic, air pollution and safety. This area is already one of the most congested in the city. Lothian School, as many may already be aware, has already been identified as suffering from high pollution levels. Parents are worried about their children breathing in more polluted air and navigating increased traffic just to get to school safely. And I also wanted to highlight the frustration felt by residents who were not properly consulted. Many people in this community face language or digital barriers and they feel excluded from a process that directly affects their lives. Despite my request for an accessible local meeting with McDonald's, meaningful engagement did not take place. Chair and members, I am opposing this application on behalf of local parents and residents who fear the long-term impact of this development will have on their children's health, their environment and their neighbourhood. So therefore I urge this committee to listen to those voices and reject this application for this site. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigat, and well within time. Well done. We've got two speakers in favour of this application. The first I have is Annie Newman, if you'd like to come to the microphone. You've switched it on. Yep. You have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members of the Planning Committee. My name is Annie Newman and I'm a Senior Acquisition Surveyor for McDonald's Restaurants in the Yorkshire region. I would like to thank your officer for their presentation, and while we are of course disappointed with the recommendation, we welcome the opportunity to address the committee today. I'm joined this afternoon by Peter Swallow from Bolsterstone Group, the site owners, together with AMA consultants from Highways and Lichfield's planning consultants. We'll be pleased to respond to any questions members may have. As you have heard, the recommendation for refusal is based on 2 matters only: the site's location and the design of the proposal. Importantly, there are no outstanding technical objections, including highways, flood risk or environmental health. Firstly, to pick up on location. As acknowledged in the officer's report, the site is partly located within a local shopping centre as defined in Sheffield's adopted UDP. National planning policy directs town centre uses to town, district and local centres, and the proposed restaurant should therefore be acceptable in principle as it lies in a sequentially preferable location. In relation to healthy eating, McDonald's is committed to giving their customers a range of options and supporting them better to understand the choices they make. Our nutrition strategy has been in place for over 15 years, and during that time we have reformulated over 200 ingredients and invested heavily in broadening its menu of balanced healthy options. Secondly, design. The layout of the site has been informed by several factors, most notably flood risk. The restaurant building will be located in part of the site least likely to flood. Indeed, the site's flood risk status has prevented other forms of development, such as residential, from coming forward. The restaurant building itself will be an attractive modern building and will be faced in red brick so that it complements the materials most commonly found on buildings across the surrounding area. It is an appropriate design, and together with the comprehensive landscaping scheme proposal, it would significantly enhance the appearance of the area. The proposed scheme will be a substantial improvement over the previous approval, which was granted in 2023 for a car rental storage. A new pedestrian link has been incorporated to Chipping House Road to increase pedestrian permeability into and through the site and revitalise an area which suffers from fly tipping. 2 sets of cycle stands are proposed at different ends of the site, as well as dedicated secure cycle storage for staff. Turning to the restaurant itself, it will be run by a local franchisee who will develop relationships with community groups in Lowfield and the surrounding area and provide support to local projects. The franchisee will offer apprenticeships and look to build strong community partnerships with local sports teams and other groups. The proposed development will bring a vacant site into active use and result in a real economic benefit for Lowfield, including significant investment and construction work while the restaurant is being built. Once operational, the restaurant will provide 95 direct jobs on site, which equates to 75 full-time equivalent jobs. These jobs will be highly accessible and attainable, whether for young people looking for their first experience of work, people looking for a route back into work, or those looking to build a long-term career with us. We take our responsibility as neighbours very seriously and have embedded a range of measures to protect the amenity of neighbours. The restaurant will have noise and odour mitigation, a sensitively designed lighting scheme and daily litter picks. The restaurant will close at 11 p.m. to avoid any late night disruption and will also work proactively with local bodies to ensure that the site is well managed and responsive to community needs. In summary, the scheme accords with Sheffield City Council's development plan as a whole and national planning policy. It would regenerate a prominent vacant previously developed site and would generate significant new employment opportunities. Jobs will be accessible and attainable, and for those reasons I would respectfully ask you to support the application before you today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Annie. Also within 5 minutes. Next we have Peter Swallow. If you'd like to come to the microphone, please. The microphone switched on, and you also have 5 minutes. Okay.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. My name is Peter Swallow. I am Managing Director of Bolsterstone Group, a local property company who have been delivering projects across the area for over 30 years. We have been involved with a range of developments within Sheffield, many of them partnering with Arnold Labour Group, of which this is one. We are both local companies responsible for significant investment and employment in the Sheffield economy. We are the site owners and the joint applicants, and I am here today to support this application. Local schemes completed by us to date include Anchor Point on Bramall Lane, B&Q on Queen's Road, the Little Food Store and Doctor's Surgery at Woodseats, and most recently the £150 million first phase at West Bar, which delivered the largest single private sector investment ever made in Sheffield, which was funded by Legal & General. This site was assembled from 2005 and was cleared of dilapidated buildings and has been extensively marketed ever since as a roadside site located in a gateway location to the city centre. However, any interest received in the site in the intervening period has not proceeded to contract due to the site constraints. Time has proved that residential development is not deliverable due to issues around viability and the application of constraints in respect of the perceived flood risk by the Environment Agency. This issue has also deterred other potential commercial occupiers. The site is allocated for retail uses in the local planning policy. The flood risk issue has been addressed by McDonald's and their consultants and is the reason the building is designed and located in the manner set out in the application. We have worked with the City Council by making land available from our ownership to facilitate delivery of the highway widening, junction and access improvements. These works involved a multi-million-pound expenditure which has been delivered and already significantly improved traffic flow on this strategic route into the city centre. We believe the application before you which received a positive pre-application response from officers before the application was submitted, is completely compliant with local planning policy and provides the best solution for redevelopment of this long derelict site. It will also bring into use the new access which was recently constructed by Sheffield City Council for this purpose as part of the highway improvement works which I mentioned earlier. We therefore respectfully request that you support this application so that this long derelict site can be brought back into economic use and rid the area of its derelict appearance. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Do you have any Chris, do you want to respond to any of the comments that have been made?
Just very briefly, Chair. Councillor Bashir referred to air quality. That is covered in the report. There's a section on it. I've just lost the page reference, but there is a section on it where the applicant submitted an air quality assessment that was considered by our in-house team, and we're satisfied with the conclusions on that, which are that there won't be any raising of air quality that would threaten the thresholds that exist, Chair, for that being acceptable. In terms of the comments by the second speaker, yes, we acknowledge, and I did in the introduction, that the design or the location of the building on the site is somewhat informed by the flood risk. We feel there's more flexibility in that the building could be located in a slightly more prominent position and could also be better designed. But we do acknowledge that we're very unlikely to get buildings on the frontage of the site, on the London Road frontage, which is where we would ideally prefer them in urban design terms. And we also acknowledge that from the original submission, improvements have been made in connectivity to the area to the north of the site on Chipping House Road with a pedestrian and cycle link at that point. We've acknowledged that in the report, Chair. And so, yeah, and again, Peter Swallow also mentioned the constraints around flood risk. We do accept and acknowledge that, but we feel that a better scheme can be produced, and that this one falls down for the reasons that we said. That's all, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. And open it up to members' questions. I've got Nikki, then Marianne.
Thank you, Chair. The first speaker in favour of the application said that seemed to dismiss the public health concerns that have been raised. There's quite a lengthy submission from our public health part of the council. Do you think these concerns still stand? There's quite a few around the data that they say the applicant has used, suggesting that they've used data about the health of local children, that they've used it from a more affluent area and ignored the less affluent area where the data is quite different. And also, what was the other one? That in terms of the definition of schools as well, I'd like your comments on that, please.
Chris?
Chair, in terms of public health data, we've discussed it with public health. We've had very extensive input from them. The basis of that is set out in quite some length in the report, particularly around proximity to other facilities, schools, sports facilities, other areas where children will congregate in close proximity. That's all that's set out in the report, and there's quite a lot of them and quite a lot of it. In terms of the data, the areas that are drawn, that information is drawn from, they're set out on page 94 and 95, and they're taken from its Office of National Statistics data and their boundaries, which are relatively small. There are I'm no expert in this because I'm not public health, but there are middle super output areas and lower super output areas. Middle are bigger than lower. Middle have 2,000 to 6,000 households, and lower have less than that. I can't see the number right in front of me, Chair, but it's in the report. And yes, what one area takes into other certain parts of Netheredge and Sharrow that will be more affluent probably, and there's lower deprivation recorded there than in another area which goes in another direction, perhaps around Lowfield. And that's just the way that, you know, boundaries are drawn for assessing those kind of things. We've followed our public health advice on this, which we felt was perfectly reasonable and demonstrated quite a strong case. In terms of schools definition, I presume there you're referring to, Councillor Belfield's referring to the difference, or secondary and primary schools. And again, we referenced that in the report. And the MPPF refers to schools. So we consider that to be all schools. And in fact, that is now forms part of our forthcoming policies in the emerging plan, which did originally identify as primary schools, but clearly the direction of travel in most national considerations of this issue has been towards primary and secondary. And I would suggest that on a site like this that is very close to a primary school, within only kind of 3 minutes walk, certainly children at primary school level are attracted by this kind of facility. And even if they are accompanied by parents, there's a degree of, it's often referred to as pester power, for that kind of activity to be used by those children. So I do think that all schools are relevant in this context.
Thank you, Chris. Marianne.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to say I really appreciate the clarity of this report. I think the public health implications and also the proximity to schools and youth facilities were set out really, really clearly. So I think the refusal seems like an obvious conclusion. I didn't actually have any questions until yesterday and when we went on the site visit. And when we were on site visit, it really struck me how close the homes on Chipping House Road would be to the kitchen and the main building. So not only would they be facing the sort of back of a, you know, unattractive and low quality building, as been referenced, but the smell and the lighting, it really struck me like how much of an issue that would be because of that proximity. And I think anyone who walks past the McDonald's knows that how strong and, like, frankly unpleasant the smell is. And obviously the lighting would be an issue as well. And I know it's referenced on page 101 in not massive amounts of detail, but I just thought, bearing in mind this would be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, literally forever, you know, not just a build that's sort of, you know, constructed within a finite amount of time. This is like going to impact people's lives, you know, for in the very long term. How would that be actually sufficiently mitigated? Would that be mitigated with conditions, and how would that work?
Chair, in the event of approval, then yes, they're on all ranges, all scales of food generating, food and drink users. There are usually a list of a raft of conditions that deal with odour, noise, lighting, hours of operation, etc. So in the event of an approval, then yes, we would be looking to condition those things. Obviously, this is not a recommendation for approval, so we haven't set those out here. What I would say generally as well on odour, noise and lighting, they were all quite significant concerns in the previous submission because we weren't satisfied. All of those things fall under the Environmental Protection Service consideration and their input to the application. And they were not satisfied with the level of information provided in the original application around those things. But that has been improved in the later submission to a degree where no significant adverse impacts are envisaged in those areas subject to the imposition of conditions.
Thank you, Chris. Mark, you have a question.
Could I just first of all have clarification? I thought the first speaker for the development was saying it would close at 11, but there's some suggestion that it's a possibility of a 24-hour opening.
Chair, I understand that the intention would be to close at 11.
Right. Okay. Then the next thing I wanted to say, partly continuing from what Councillor Elliott said. I mean, I've been, there's a drive-through McDonald's out where I live at the Stocksbridge bypass, and I've used it once or twice. And I've found that although it's not necessary for the customers to do this, they tend to leave their engines idling while they're queuing up from the place where they've ordered it to the place where it's passed to them through the window. It's not necessary for them to do that, but they just do seem to do it. As it's been pointed out, this is just yards away from residential properties the other side of the street. I mean, you can imagine them in summer sitting in their front gardens in the evenings. Are you absolutely sure that the air quality assessments are adequate here? Thank you.
Chair, we've taken the advice of environmental protection colleagues who have assessed the applicant's professional consultant submission on that, and the conclusion is yes, we are satisfied that it doesn't raise concerns above the relevant thresholds.
Can I just clarify a bit further on Mark's behalf? Does that include the the vehicles as well as the building itself?
Yes, so it's fumes, etc., from the odour from the building, but also air quality associated with vehicles. Yeah.
Thank you, Henry.
Thank you, Chair. The traffic impact assessment provided by the applicant seems to be focusing on assumed normal afternoon or morning and evening peak traffic times. But there's a lot of people who live in the area, myself included, will tell you peak traffic around there relates as much to do with events at the mosque and events at Bramall Lane for Sheffield United football matches. Has any assessment been done that's looking at impact at peak times? So I particularly imagine that before and after a football match, we're going to have a perfect storm of very high local traffic and an awful lot of that traffic wanting to visit a drive-through McDonald's.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, they have also looked at a Saturday peak, which is actually the busiest time. There isn't any assessment done specifically on a football match day or at the mosque times. As I said, the periods that they've looked at are a weekday, morning and evening, normal peak period, and then a Saturday, which is sort of around the lunchtime area, which tends to be the busiest then. And that's actually the time when the highest level of traffic is generated by the development, but not specifically on the times, as you say, for football matches and what. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Case, you have a question?
Thank you. Am I correct to understand the refusal is for a drive-through restaurant and not just a restaurant?
Yeah, the refusal is based on the description as set out in at the beginning of the application, and its whole layout, its design is a drive-through facility, and it's a facility which relies quite heavily on the takeaway content for the vast majority of the sales. Yeah.
And have you received objections by the local councillors, all three councillors in that ward, based on their engagements with the community?
Chair, I haven't checked whether all three have raised objections, but the councillors' objections are set out in the report. Certainly some of those are local councillors, but I couldn't
Pretty
confirm
sure
quickly.
both Councillors Uller and Basharat, and of course Councillor Basharat is here today to speak against the application. Henry.
My understanding is that Councillor Maroof Raouf from Nether Edge Ward has also objected. The local MP Abdesam Mohammed has objected, unless I'm mistaken, and councillors from City Ward and councillors from Gleadless Valley Ward. So I think it's safe to say there's significant objection from all local councillors, not just for the ward that it's located in.
There's been high-level engagement all round from political representatives local to the area.
Chair, they're set out in the report starting on page 81 with the local MP Abdesam Mohammed, Councillor Basharat, Alexis Demond, and then yes, sorry, that's it, I believe.
Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Question really for you, Chris. As it stands, are the hours of operation restricted in any way in the proposal or detailed in the application proposal? If it's in here, I apologise.
Chair, I understood it was to, I'm looking now for the confirmation here, but I understood, as the second speaker said, that it was to close at 11 and open reasonably early in the morning, but I cannot see them for looking. Sorry, I should know that, Chair, but off the top I don't.
The reason for my question is really whether they, because I picked up the fact also the speaker said 11, but is that a voluntary restriction, or is it actually one that is, you know, a proper restriction, should I say?
Chair, can I just very quickly, I knew there was something in here. So yeah, the initial proposal, if I recall correctly, was for 24 hours. When I say initial, the previous application. The current opening hours are proposed as 7 in the morning till 11 at night. So in the event of an approval, that would be what we've assessed it on, and that's what we would wish to limit it to if that was the...
Okay, and then being a bit speculative, but I think it's worth it. Assuming this is refused, and the applicant then appeals, would the appeal reset the hours of operation, or and if the appeal was successful, would those hours of operation carry with that appeal?
So the appeal would be on the basis of the submission, and an inspector would consider it on the hours proposed, but an inspector, like the planning authority, has the opportunity and ability to vary those hours and impose whichever hours they see fit, whether that's whether they consider those restrictions aren't necessary and 24 hours is fine, or whether they feel that more restrictive hours are appropriate.
But there's a degree of defence in there. Okay, thank you, that's very clear.
Thank you. I see no more hands, so do members want... Gary? Your question.
Thanks, Chair. It's only one. On Chipping House Road, Chris, from Windy to the back wall of McDonald's, of proposed McDonald's, how far is it?
I'll be able to find that out if you just give me a minute, Chair. Sorry, Chair, it's quite a long time since I've used a scale rule. Things tend to be digital these days.
Old technology.
I would say from McDonald's building to front facade of the residence on Chipping House Road, it's in the order of 22 metres.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chris.
Nikki, you have another question.
Thank you, Chair. No, it was just going back to before where I raised the issues about the public health considerations. And I knew there was another piece of data where there seemed to be different interpretations. So the applicant was looking at how close schools and other places that young people may congregate in, how close it is. And there seems to have been some difference between what they define as that sort of easy walking distance and what you've suggested. So is it 400 metres and 800 metres? Is that right, the difference? Is it, well, on what, yeah, can you just explain to me why there's that difference, what each side is basing that on, please?
We consider 800 metres is what we consider to be walking distance. It's what we use in a lot of our policies and in guidance around whether something is accessible or not. So 800 metres is the figure we use, and which again is forming part of the local plan. 400 metres is obviously smaller and therefore involves less consideration. I can't recall exactly why the applicant felt that was more appropriate. But that's the reason we feel that 800 is the more appropriate distance. I'm sure this is set out in the report and I'm trying to look for it. So
Page 92.
there's appeal, we've drawn on appeal references as set out on the bottom of page 92, and the 10-minute walking distance equates to 800 metres in our consideration. And we think that is an appropriate measurement for assessment of distance that someone might walk to a particular facility. Yes, yep.
Just to follow up then, so I was looking at the exceptions in the national guidance for refusing an application such as this, and I just want to be clear because obviously there's different interpretations of this. It seems there are two, it's either that they're too close or that they're in an area where there's already a high concentration of those kinds of fast food places, and there's evidence that it's had an adverse effect on the health of local people. And it seems pretty strongly worded, I suppose, from our public health official that they believe that to be the case. But there seems to also be some distinction between whether it's in a town centre or not. That's one of the, you can ignore the rule about fast food being close to schools if it's considered a town centre. So what's the definition of that? Like, does this,
I know we're a city, but does this count as being within the city centre? And obviously, I know in the emerging local plan, we're encouraging people to live in the city centre more. So I just wanted to see on that exception, whether it applies or not.
I don't have the full definition in front of me. Chair, but as I mentioned in the intro, this relates to paragraph 97 of the MPPF, and it has kind of two arms to it, A and B, and it's an A or B rather than both needing to apply. So if either one of those circumstances applies, then the MPPF directs refusal of permission. Part A is if it's within walking distance of a school and other places where young people congregate. We feel it very firmly is, unless it's in a designated town centre. Then the glossary to the MPPF refers to town centres as including district and local centres. The Unitary Development Plan identifies a part of the site as a local centre, but not the part where the building is located. It's the part where the access is. So on part A, we feel that that alone is represents conflict with paragraph 97. And then B is the evidence of a concentration of such use as having an adverse impact on local health. So there's very much a concentration of such uses in the vicinity. Particularly obviously on London Road, which is a little bit further away, but it's within the 800-metre walking distance, and there are others in between. And there is evidence of poor quality health locally compared to both Sheffield and to the national average. So for those reasons, we feel that it fails, if you like, on both parts of paragraph 97.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. I'm going to open it up now for members' comments, given that we've heard the report, we've had an opportunity to read it and ask officers questions and hear from both objectors, the objector and the people speaking for the application. So does anyone want to speak? Marianne.
Thanks, yeah. I just wanted to say thanks again for the comprehensive report, and I found it particularly helpful that nearby schools and areas where young people congregate were really clearly listed on page 93, which, showed us evidently that section 97 of the MPPF does apply here. And it's also really positive to see that public health has been taken seriously here and given due weight, given the sort of long-term negative impacts. I just wanted to note a couple of things. Like, there is evidence that young people have been speaking out about this too, and they're not particularly impressed with these sort of fast food giants targeting them. For example, Bite Back, a youth organisation, say that fast food giants are targeting our environments. They know where schools are located and place their ads and outlets en route. This is clearly very worrying and something we wouldn't want to be endorsing. And also with regards to air quality, this has been reported in our local press. I think it's worth mentioning that Lowfield School is the school that has the city's worst air pollution. I found an article from 2022 in the Sheffield Star where Graham Turnbull was quoted, the Clean Air campaigner who's sadly no longer with us, and he said children are more vulnerable to those types of pollutants. So it seems fairly obvious we shouldn't be sort of making the situation worse. So all in all, I think the reasons seem really sound and clear, and I'll be rejecting this application. Thanks.
Does anyone else wish to speak? Okay, we'll put it to a vote. The vote will be on the officer recommendation. So, all those in favour of the officer recommendation to refuse? That is unanimous. So I don't need to ask for anyone against. So, We now move on to 9C, planning application number 22. Oh, that means it's been around for 2 or 3 years, doesn't it? Stroke 03350 stroke full, and that's at number 1 Broom Close, 136 and 138, and the site of the former 126 London Road. Sorry, Henry.
Before we get into this, it occurs to me I should have said this at the start of the meeting. I do sit on Sheffield Conservation Advisory Group. They have commented on the application rather than objecting to it, but the comments can be read as an objection. However, I wasn't part of that process, and I don't feel it's affected my impartiality. So I don't feel I should be removed from the vote, but Victoria is looking at me.
Whether you take part is a matter for yourself. Things to put your mind to are whether there's a perception of bias. So if you're sat on a group that has, objected to the scheme, is there a perception there that you can't be as objective as you ordinarily would be? Is that what I would, consider for yourself? But it is a matter for yourself. Thank you, Chair.
I sit on the group as a council representative rather than as a matter of personal interest, so I'm happy to proceed as long as you are.
Okay. In another context, I see parish councillors sit on another planning committee, and where they know something's been discussed at parish level, they've absented themselves from that so that they can then take part in the planning application later on. So sounds to me like a similar context. They've taken part in their deliberations on this. So we are on page 111. Just restate that the site is at 1 Broom Close and a number of addresses on London Road. And the site would also include the former coffee and coca house that was built in the 1870s. So back to you, Chris.
So it's a very lengthy description there on the screen and in the papers, but I'll hopefully try and break that down a little bit. So this is a prominent site on London Road, much closer to town than the previous site, at its junction with Keaton's Hill and Broom Close, as seen there on the screen. There's 3 portions to the site. There's number 136 to 138 London Road, which is a 2-storey former Bungalow shop fitting office showroom, and being referred to as the coffee house. Then there is a vacant or empty former Tramways public house site following its demolition maybe 10 years ago or something similar. And there is also a large vacant office building, which is the larger of the grey-brown shapes within the site boundary on that slide. And that's a building that was constructed in 2008 as an office building with basement car parking, but which has never really been fully occupied. And it is currently vacant at the moment, although there is what I understand to be a somewhat temporary use in the basement. On this plan, probably better than on the aerial photograph, you'll see to the sort of northwest, adjacent to the green space, is a building that is on the corner of Club Garden Road and Broom Close. That's the Grade 2 listed Hornhandle Works, which is in close proximity and adjacent to that public open space. So we have to have a consideration of the setting of that in this particular application. The unitary development plan allocation consists of district shopping centre on the London Road frontage, and housing allocation on the rest of the site. So I'll just move through the slides very briefly at the moment, so you can see a little bit more there what the makeup of the site is. That is the building, the more recently constructed building, and you can see there the access to the basement at number 1 Broom Close. 136, 138 London Road there, the former coffee house, and more recently Bungalow shop fitting, office and showroom. I understand the coffee house use ceased in something like 1908, Chair. This is the site of the former Tramways public house. You see it's rather detracting from the street scene at the moment. And that's a view up the side of Keaton's Hill, where you can see the office building behind 136, 138 London Road. I will come back to those shortly, Chair. So the London Road building has been the subject, or was the subject, and still is, of much local interest when the initial proposals saw its demolition as part of the redevelopment of the site. And that's subsequently been declared non-designated heritage asset, and an Article 4 direction was imposed preventing its demolition. Interest springs largely from the building's architectural interest, although as you can see it's much altered, Chair, particularly on the frontage here, and also internally. And also its original use as Sheffield's first coffee house, which was seen as an alternative to the public house around that time. So the proposal has been significantly revised since that initial submission, and now include the facade retention and refurbishment of this building here on the screen, with a new structure behind and 2-storey mansard roof above that takes a very contemporary form, and likely to contain a copper bronze metal cladding treatment. The facade would be restored, including retention of the freezers, of which there are 7 across the frontage, like those 2 there, and the mosaics that are either side. That's a close-up of them and only shows a small section. But you can see from that image and the previous one, perhaps, the extent of alteration. And the mosaics aren't in exactly pristine condition. The 1960s interventions and the mosaics are to receive a paint treatment as they're in poor condition, and removal isn't practical, Chair, as has been demonstrated by some test areas that have quite clearly indicated that there's a very strong cement base being used to their adhesion. A lot of the more ornate features on the ground floor, similar perhaps to that left-hand doorway that you see going up Keaton's Hill, have been removed in the application of those features. So we've concluded with the applicant team that there's little prospect of successful removal of those and exposure of fine detail brickwork or stonework, and that their retention and treatment is the better option. The second portion is a new build element on the top right-hand corner, or on the Tramways public house site. That's a 6-storey element on that site, and roof extensions to the former office building, with the existing basement being converted to self-storage. There would be a Class E use on the ground floor of the London Road fronting building or buildings, and the remainder of the accommodation would be residential. There'd be 56 apartments in total, comprising 2 studios, 38 1-bedroom apartments and 16 2-bedroom apartments. The balance of representations on the revised proposals is in favour of opposing the application, if that makes sense, principally on heritage grounds over the loss of the building in its current form. There are no significant land use policy issues with either element of the proposed uses. the scheme involves the provision of housing, so members are reminded of the lack of a 5-year supply in Sheffield, meaning that paragraph 11 of the MPPF and the presumption in favour of development means planning permission should be granted unless there are adverse impacts that significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. There is an elevated protection for heritage assets in that consideration under paragraph 11, but that doesn't explicitly apply to non-designated heritage assets. So there's a subtle difference there, Chair. There are no residential amenity concerns with the proposed residential accommodation, and in highways and transportation terms, it's considered a highly sustainable location. There's no parking provision in the scheme except for 2 disabled spaces up near the top left-hand corner there. It's adjacent to quite a large car park, which is actually owned by the applicant, but is a pay and display car park, which is to the west there, oh sorry, left-hand side of that drawing, but it's the southwest, I believe. And it's obviously in walking distance of the city centre and many facilities locally. The developments of a scale which would trigger the provision of affordable housing, subject, of course, to a viability appraisal, which is embedded in the policy. The developer's undertaken a viability appraisal that's been considered by our independent surveyor, and they've confirmed that there's insufficient profit in the scheme to enable an affordable housing contribution. That is in line with policy, so we have no objections to that approach, Chair. So the key issue is the effect on the non-designated heritage asset. And the loss of the building and its structure and its roof is regrettable. But the building is much altered and the internal features largely removed. And attempts to list the building in 2023 were rejected by Historic England. Retaining and refurbishing the facade are valuable elements of the scheme, and we think a good approach. It works well with the treatment, the elevational treatment shown here, which shows the mansard, the 2 stories of mansard accommodation on top. And the applicants advised, we discussed this at length with them in between the 2 schemes, Chair. And supported by the viability appraisal, they advise that a simple conversion of the building isn't viable, delivers very few apartments at significant cost, and removing the roof and adding those units above alongside the additional storey on the adjacent buildings and obviously the new block on the corner maintains viability in the scheme. So given therefore that the tilted balance is engaged, with significant benefits of 56 dwellings being proposed, the economic benefits that come with the construction and occupation of those, the redevelopment of this long vacant and prominent site, we consider that these outweigh the harm to the non-designated heritage asset, and approval is recommended, Chair. If I just quickly go through the supplementary information, item 2 of the supplementary information. There's an addition to the report in that the report didn't do justice to the self-storage element of the proposal. And we're merely setting out there, Chair, that there's no significant policy objection. And as an aside, but a relevant consideration in terms of the viability of the scheme, if we go back to here, so there's quite a long grey rectangular building, grey roofed rectangular building on the southern side of the red line there, that's perpendicular to the red line. That's a building which is owned by the applicant and which is currently used, at least in parts, for self-storage. And that self-storage facility would be relocated to the basement of the large vacant office building, and the current self-storage facility would be converted to housing under a permission that's already been granted, Chair. So that's the kind of connection between those two elements of the scheme. So we don't feel there's any significant issue with the self-storage facility, and that's set out in there, subject to some conditions on timing of operations that are already set out in the recommendation, conditions 13 and 14 in particular. There's been one further additional representation from Councillor Ibiula, who's written objecting to the proposal on the grounds stated here, and these are including that with reference to the Cocoa House, the treatment is not sufficient to address its significance. The proposal would cause harm to it, and the internal features aren't properly recognised or protected. That the development would seriously damage the historic streetscape of London Road. The 6-storey tower would overwhelm the Cocoa House. The loss of the Victorian roof particularly concerning, and the Article 4 protection clearly demonstrates the community value of the Cocoa House, and in summary concludes that in welcoming the redevelopment to the site as a whole, states the proposal is not acceptable in its current form. And then finally, Chair, I mentioned the sustainable location of the site and the absence of car parking provision, and if members agree the recommendation, the directive listed there, which is the standard car-free directive, would need to be imposed to make it clear to future occupants that a permit is unlikely to be achieved. That's it, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. We have 5 speakers for this item, 3 speaking against the application and 2 speaking for. Those speaking against the application, Councillors Nigat Basharat and Councillor Janet Riddler are known to us, and Janet, I should say, has stepped back from the committee, and she will not be taking part in the vote, as she said at the start of the meeting. And Councillor Basharat is a former member of this committee, so which explains why she's probably better, also quite well known to us. So I'm going to ask Nigat Basharat to come to the table and speak against this application, and you have again 5 minutes.
Right, thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of many local residents and people who have value preserving our heritage, which this building represents. This site includes Sheffield's first cocoa and coffee house, a rare and historic building that is deeply valued by the community. Local people feel strongly that the building should be saved, and this is why I campaigned with them to oppose previous plans for demolition. Our heritage is a vital part of our city's character and identity, and it is important that we do our best to protect what we have. Many of my constituents have told me how strongly they feel about this building, and I share their views. The loss of most of the building is unacceptable, and we would harm the street scene and character of the area. The scale and design of the proposed development are out of keeping with its surroundings. There has been no clear justification for demolishing most of the building rather than reusing it, which would also better support our climate goals. I also agree with concerns raised by the Sheffield Conservation Advisory Group, the Victorian Society, the 20th Century Society and Hallamshire Historic Buildings. This scheme represents a missed opportunity, and I object to it. And I just want to mention also, whatever the outcome of today's meeting, I would request that the strictest possible conditions are applied to protect the heritage parts of the building, including its original features, materials and detailing. This is essential to ensure that if development goes ahead, what remains of this historic building is fully safeguarded. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Call Councillor Janet Riddler to the table next. You know the procedure, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. The Highfield Coffee House is not a grand building, but its quiet historic importance must not be overlooked. It has huge significance in the working class history of Sheffield through its temperance role in the Victorian period, being built to provide working class men and their families with an alcohol-free social environment as an alternative to pubs. Because its working class use means that it's not fancy, and because this is being used to somehow argue that it is not as worthy of being saved, this does a great disservice to our city's working class heritage. And this is the attitude which has seen in the past many historic buildings in more deprived areas of the city being destroyed and leaving them with very little in the way of built heritage. Now, this building was well used from the very first day of opening, and it was popular amongst these ordinary working people who at last had somewhere that they could meet and socialise away from the daily grind of working in Sheffield's industry and the factories. And it is an important part of our city's heritage, and the many objections to this application, I think, really illustrate that. I'm opposing it as the City Council's heritage champion. As we've heard, local ward councillors are opposing, Hallamshire Historic Buildings, Save Britain's Heritage, the Council for British Archaeology, and many more. And indeed, our planning authority have recognised and acknowledged its importance as a historic building and to Sheffield's social history through its current status as a non-designated heritage asset, which benefits the character of the area it is located in. In this application, we see that the developer is offering the absolute minimum keeping part of the facade. As we've seen in recent months with the loss of the distinctive facade at the former Wiley & Co store on Haymarket, facades are very vulnerable to deterioration and collapse once their supporting structure has been removed. The entire character of this building will be destroyed if this application is granted. And there's an extra story now being added on to the original proposal, leaving us with a huge roof extension and a 6-storey tower, which will cause substantial harm to the existing 19th century London Road streetscape and the Victorian character of this area by the intrusion of a tall building in modern materials which in no way respects or complements its surroundings. The applicants claim that they care about the heritage of the building, and yet they have already tried, not once, but twice, to get this building demolished. Their claims look rather hollow in this context. They are relying on the number of homes provided elsewhere in the scheme to justify the entirely unnecessary and avoidable damage which will see most of this building destroyed. This application is totally unjustified in heritage and environmental terms, and is destructive and insensitive. The building has survived well for a century, having successfully been converted for alternative use in the past, such as by Barlow's shop fitters in the 60s, and is in sound condition. This building should again be converted, not destroyed. A more sympathetic approach to the existing building and the character of its setting is urgently needed. This application represents overdevelopment of the site and an unnecessary level of harm to a significant historic building and should be refused. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Janet. Would Nigel Slack come to the microphone, please? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair. Thank you. I hope I'm also recognisable to a number of the people around this chair, around these tables. I may go more than 5 minutes, so please feel free to cut me off when I get to that point, because I could talk for hours on this particular subject. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Victorian Society in South Yorkshire to object to this planning application, and my comments relate largely to the Highfield Cocoa and Coffee House and its Victorian history and heritage. First, I'd like to highlight some basic misunderstandings or misrepresentations within this application. As Councillor Riddler has commented, the applicant has already tried twice to get permission to demolish the building, so claims that they care about heritage are a little shaky. The building is protected by an Article 4 direction, preventing demolition without full planning permission. However, the destruction of some 75 to 80% of the building's fabric, including the rear wall, all internal fabric, and the original roof, is simply demolition by another name. Think of your own house. If you had 2 walls, no innards, no roof, and the back wall missing as well, would you consider that destruction, or would you consider that amendment? Officers state the proposed partial demolition of numbers 136 to 138 London Road would represent less than substantial harm to the asset and is not considered an optimal solution in heritage terms. This is simply wrong. The planned destruction demonstrates very significant harm both to the cocoa house itself but also to the Victorian streetscape in which it stands. Facadism is now considered in most architectural and heritage circles to be an unacceptable rather than simply a suboptimal solution for an historic heritage asset. There's also been comment that the interior fixtures and fittings are no longer relevant. However, within their own heritage statement, the applicant mentions that above the suspended ceilings within parts of the building are examples of cornices and other ceiling treatments, probably from its original construction. Without exploring this, how can it be said that that is no longer relevant? Officers also state that overall it's considered that the provision of this number of housing units and other benefits noted in the above report would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the adverse impacts of the development. This is misleading, as the cocoa house itself makes a minimal contribution to the number of homes provided by the scheme overall. Sorry, lost my place. Yet the developer has refused to consider just retaining and converting it, relying on the number of homes provided in the main site to justify the damage it will do to the cocoa house, which again, I reiterate, will see most of that building destroyed. I have to ask that if the extra housing that this proposal presents for the cocoa house cannot be found in the main part of the site, is this development really viable at all? It's already been determined that it's not viable enough to have any affordable housing. So is it at all viable? I would also point out that the roof is an important part of its historic character, and its replacement is just an overdevelopment. The Palatine Chambers in Pinston Street is quoted as precedent, but in that case the new mansard restores the building's original proportions, whereas at Highfield the proportions survive, are architecturally of central importance, and will be destroyed entirely. Is that me done?
No, you've got 30 seconds.
Oh, marvellous. In that case, I'll just mention that Sheffield Conservation Advisory Group, Victorian Society, Hallamshire Historic Buildings, the 20th Century Society and the Council for British Archaeology have all objected to this scheme alongside the council's own heritage champion, and this should be sufficient to prevent this scheme going forward. That is a huge amount of experience and hundreds of years of expertise that have all decided this is not a good solution.
Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you very much.
Well done. We have two speakers for the application. First up, I have Caroline McIntyre. Michael wants to go first, that's fair enough. You have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Councillor.
Good afternoon.
And councillors, yes, good afternoon. Thank you for hearing me this afternoon. My name is Michael Barlow, and I am the applicant for this item. I wanted to give some background to this application. I'm from a 4-generation family shopfitting company known as Barlow Shopfitters. Keaton's Management Services, the applicant, is simply a name change of George Barlow and Sons, the company that originally bought the properties. The reason we are discussing these properties today is that sadly, with the move to out-of-town sheds and online shopping, our family business went into receivership. This meant that the 1-acre site off London Road that had been our base for nearly 120 years was no longer required. Regarding the specific history of the buildings in the application, number 1 Broom Close was built to allow our offices to expand. It had been the site of our old factory, which had moved out to Tinsley. Unfortunately, just as the build was starting, the 2007-2008 financial crash occurred. And now, rather than expanding, the company needed to shrink. The build needed to be stopped. But this would have put the builder into bankruptcy, so we agreed to build it to shell only. Despite numerous attempts to rent or sell the empty building, it has lain empty ever since. Number 136 London Road was built by Sir Frederick Mappin in 1877 as the Highfield Cocoa and Coffee House, which it was for 32 years. In 1909, it was put up for sale and bought by George Barlow and Sons, and over the next 100 years, it was the head office of our shopfitting company. Attempts to find a use for number 136 have also come to nothing, and it too has lain empty for many years. What we're trying to achieve: to watch my family business die and the employment lost is a source of great regret. So to see the site come back to life in a new form is a real driver for me. So far, we have repurposed about half of the 1-acre site. The old Triumph Works at 1 Keaton's Hill became offices on the first floor, and the ground floor became a base for a self-storage business, which has been successful and is ready to expand. 2 public car parks have been opened, and these, along with a self-storage operation, are in use by local residents and are supporting local businesses. With floodlights and CCTV installed and regular cleaning of the area, we've stopped fly tipping, we've stopped the drug use and dealing, and human defecation. So put simply, we're trying to finish the repurposing. The remaining empty buildings will be converted into much needed accommodation. The retail space fronting London Road will be enhanced, and an existing self-storage business allowed to expand. By approving this application, we can breathe new life into this part of London Road. Caroline, our planning consultant, will now detail the efforts we've made to engage with the council to meet their requirements and satisfy concerns raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I should say good evening, not good afternoon now, Caroline. I think you know the procedure.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Caroline McIntyre, and we're the agents for this item. We were appointed on the project in 2022, and there was an application on the site from 2021 which included the demolition of the London Road building, which had attracted little public interest at that time. We progressed a revised application on the assumption there would continue to be limited interest in the proposals. However, it became clear that although being rejected for statutory listing, there was a lot of interest in the potential demolition of 136 to 138 London Road. The applicants have not pursued a scheme to appeal, which includes the demolition of the London Road building. Instead, acknowledging the public interest in the building, they've taken the opportunity to explore options and work with officers to agree a scheme which retains this building. We've been working to find a viable proposal since 2023. The overriding issue for development is that residential values are really low. As noted in CPV in their report, construction costs in this part of Sheffield have also outpaced market values. We've looked at options for the conversion of the London Road building as it stands, but this only delivers 4 small units and a ground floor commercial unit, and this isn't viable even as part of the wider development. In order to retain and reuse the existing buildings, additional residential floor space is needed. The interiors of the London Road building have been altered over the years as a showcase for Barlow shop fitters. As a showcase for Barlow shop fitters. This is also apparent externally. This has left very little of any merit internally, and the building is in a state of disrepair. And the rear of the building is much altered from where it previously linked to the factory. A full heritage statement is submitted in support of the application, and the advice has been that the value in this building is primarily from the external appearance of the front and side elevations and the cultural heritage from its initial use. The retention of the facade, which is an approach used successfully elsewhere in the city, allows these important parts of the building to be retained whilst increasing the density. The viability appraisal shows a profit of 15%, which is at the very lowest end of the accepted scale of viability. But the proposals deliver a number of public benefits, as outlined in the officer report, including the provision of 56 new dwellings, the retention in situ of the freezers, active frontages to one of the largest potential units on London Road, which is hoped could be a coffee shop, and self-storage to support local shops and businesses. Less massing on the site and lower scale development isn't a viable option, but this application proposal would deliver a future for these long-term vacant buildings. We therefore ask that you follow the officer recommendation and approve the application before you today, allowing a new chapter for this site to come forward. And Michael and I are happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Chris, do you want to respond to
I don't think there's much to respond to there, Chair, because it's mostly set out in the report and it is likely to be discussed as well here. Just in terms of Councillor Basharat referencing if permission is approved, then strict conditions should apply in terms of retaining existing features. That they are recommended in the report, including condition 5, which deals with the freezers and the mosaic and everything at the front, which ironically they're the later additions, but they are of interest and tell the story of its evolution. I think it's worth saying or drawing members' attention to a distinction between a non-designated heritage asset and a designated one in terms of the MPPF. So I mentioned at the beginning the consideration of paragraph 11 and the tilted balance. That can be negated, if you like, where there is clear conflict with impact on where there's clear impact on designated heritage assets and the policies in the MPPF and local policies support a resistance of an application, then that can negate or set aside the presumption in favour in paragraph 11. But that doesn't apply to non-designated heritage assets. They don't have that elevated protection, if you like. So that's one area that I think is worth noting. And in paragraph 216 of the MPPF, it's a much lower test when you're considering the impact of development on a heritage asset, designated or not. Sorry, I'm putting heritage asset as my password now. It is a lower test for a non-designated heritage asset. So where you have to, with a designated asset, have to attribute a level of harm and balance that against the benefits, paragraph 216 is subtly different in that it says, I'll read it almost verbatim because it's quite short. The effect of an application on the significance of a non-designated heritage asset should be taken into account in determining the application. Clearly it should, and we are doing. And in weighing those applications that directly or indirectly affect non-designated heritage assets, a balanced judgment will be required, having regard to the scale of any harm or loss and the significance of the asset. So I just want to point out, Chair, that's a lower threshold and consideration than for designated assets. There was a question around, is it still viable? And I think Caroline McIntyre answered that in confirming that the viability appraisal identified a profit of 15%, which in terms of affordable housing consideration, that's generally considered a reasonable profit, above which affordable housing provision comes into play. So the conclusion is that it's not making enough profit to trigger that, but it is making enough profit for it to be viable, if that makes sense. And I think that's it, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. Members got any questions? Cliff, you've not spoken, so...
Thank you, Chair. I must say I like the upper story of that building and the friezes, and I was really struggling to get my head round what else better could you do than that. I mean, I know it's slightly off subject and we've got to talk to what's in the proposal here, but I just feel we might end up, if you turn this down, what else could there be? I mean, in your professional view.
Chair, that's a really difficult question to answer because we only can really deal with proposals that are put before us. I think all I would say is, part of our consideration has been the length of time the applicant has, the building and the site has been vacant, and clearly without any interest in alternative proposals or occupancy. And we feel that this is, yes, it's, as I said earlier, the roof is part of the character of the building, and its loss is regrettable. But we actually feel that this is a quite an attractive treatment of it. It's not uncommon for additional stories to be placed on top of historic buildings, some listed buildings, designated assets as opposed to non-designated. And we think it's reasonably proportionate. It helps with stepping up to the 6-storey building on the corner. And London Road isn't kind of without established height. A lot of London Road is 2 to 3 stories, but some of the units, those immediately adjacent on Keaton's Hill, are 3 stories with rooms in the roof space that you can see here. They've got an element of height on them. As you come further up London Road on the left-hand side, there's a development on site at the moment that's 5 stories. So it is evolving, as it has done throughout its life, and the height is also seen with the backdrop of the tower blocks. I think they're the Lansdowne blocks, are they, or Hanover, and Lansdowne, I think. So you see in context of those and taller buildings as you get closer to the city centre. So we don't feel that height is I'm going off topic a bit, Cherry, in terms of answering the question, but it's just worth saying around what else could you do with that building, that frontage. We feel this is a better response than the initial response, which was removal of the building, and given the constraints and understanding the viability arguments that the applicant's got, we think this is something that we can support.
Andrew, and then Henry.
Thanks, Chair. Just want to just pursue the issue in the supplementary information about warehousing, because I mean, this clearly talks about relocating existing facility, but I thought we just heard that it's an expansion of existing facility. But I was just surprised by the officer's, through the chair, through the officer's praise about somewhat unique set of circumstances, for why we're not following policy 8H10. And I mean, I'm just a little surprised by the use of that language. It seems to me that in general storage facilities are further out, and therefore they have a increased number of vehicles accessing them. And you're saying you're confident that this expanded use of storage facilities will not generate any extra traffic movements. Is that what you're trying to say? And it's unusual using storage facilities on the basement of a housing development, but in this case you think it's fine in this case because special circumstances apply. I'm just surprised if special circumstances apply you wouldn't have given more depth to that argument.
Yes, Chair. So just to confirm, it would be relocating as part of relocating and expanding because it's a slightly bigger footprint. So the policy reference is to within housing area. This is a policy that is obviously quite dated now, just by time. But the B8 is generally considered an unacceptable use in housing areas because and housing policy areas apply to all kind of parts of housing within the city. So from kind of suburbia to locations such as this, you're right on the edge of the city centre and the district centre. So that's kind of one consideration in that this isn't somewhere out in kind of a more distant suburb where something like open storage would have a much more significant impact. It's in a busy commercial location, so its impacts in terms of noticeability, noise, disturbance are somewhat reduced. It's also, we don't think of a scale of a kind of a large format warehouse. It's self-storage, so it tends to be individuals coming every now and again to a facility rather than a storage and distribution facility that has got traffic to and froing all day. And then finally, that's the access to it there, which is very close to London Road, and there's very little need to engage at all with residents in carrying out any activity there, because you can simply come off London Road straight into the site and back out onto London Road without particularly affecting the residents. The mini report does refer to possible noise transmission through things like the roller shutter and what have you, but the conditions that we've got in place we feel will deal with that, those kind of things, and the hours of operation quite adequately. So that's why we think it's not a typical warehousing in warehousing or storage and distribution use in a housing area case.
Henry.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Chris. I've got questions around sort of two areas, really. You said that paragraph 11, doesn't explicitly apply to non-designated assets. Does it explicitly exclude non-designated assets from being significant? So, where a strong reason for refusal would be afforded if substantial harm was to occur to a significant asset, I think we've clearly gone over the threshold for substantial harm, so it would hinge on whether or not it was a significant asset. Can that be defined locally according to the interest of heritage groups, local objections, and the application of an Article 4 directive? Because to me they would all suggest that it's significant even if it's not designated.
Yes, to a degree. I'm trying to think where to start with trying to explain my answer to this. I'm just going to get the relevant paragraph up again just for a second. I mean, it's kind of almost like a two-tier system of assets in that below a certain level of significance than the not designated, if you like, the non-designated. So there's already kind of a greater weight that you would give to one set of assets as against the other, which is why you get that paragraph that says you have to take a balanced approach. Balanced judgment having regard to the scale of harm and significance of the asset. So I think the significance in this asset relates to its historical use, and visually its external appearance, more so than the internals, because the heritage statement identifies the possibility of some features, but a lot of its original features. The skittle alley at the back's completely gone. The first floor remains largely intact as a space, it's subdivided at the moment, but that could be removed. There's a portion of a staircase and possibly some ceiling, decorative ceiling. But the vast majority of the internal features have been removed. So its significance lies largely in its external appearance. And the roof disappears, which is reasonably significant. But the rest of it remains, and it's repurposed. So our balanced judgment has been that level of harm being acknowledged, it's something that we feel is necessary given the circumstances of the case, to make the scheme come forward, and that's why we feel that this is acceptable. I'm not sure that's answered your question, but you might want to repeat it.
It kind of has, thanks,
Yeah.
and I'll come back to that in the comments. But my second question was about the freezes, because there seems to have been a bit of confusion. On page 140 in the public pack, it says there is no intention to paint the freezes. I think in your oral report you said that they would be painted, and lots of the interested parties from a heritage viewpoint have objected to the overpainting of the freezes or the mosaics. So I guess the question is, will they be overpainted? And in condition 5, does it explicitly define the treatment for both the mosaic and the freezes?
The freezers aren't being painted. The mosaics are. The condition requires details to be submitted. It's okay. Condition 5. So a method of treatment or a proposal has been put forward, but typically in these circumstances that has been the subject of discussion, and we have taken the view that first of all we need to secure that happening, but also that before we secure that happening we need a greater level of detail, and that needs to be close to the time when we know exactly what's happening. So condition 5 does actually require us, what it requires is that before the commencement of any works to the ground floor of the retained facades, schedule of works for repair, reinstatement and finish treatment of the ground floor, including mosaic coverings, shall have been submitted to and approved by the LPA. So the reference to including mosaic coverings at the very least implies that the finish treatment is just the mosaic coverings, not the freezers. But it's certainly not part of the current proposal to paint them, and we don't want them painted.
As the mosaic not being painted is of interest to local heritage groups, would it be overly onerous on the applicant if condition 5 was amended to say that the mosaic is restored and not covered?
I don't think it would be overly restrictive or unreasonable if that was a view that members took. We've taken the view that the reason it's come forward as a repainting option or a painting over option is because of their quality. wanted those to be restored rather than painted over, then that's in members' gift.
As I'm not an expert in mosaic tiling, I would definitely defer to the relevant groups who have expressed an interest, who do have the expertise. And I'd like to propose that we amend condition 5 to say the restoration of the mosaic and friezes and remove the covering. If I have any support, I'm seeing a lot of blank faces.
Yeah, I'd happily second that proposal, as long as the experts are the ones leading on the restoration. Thank you.
We have a proposal that the that the the freezes are
the mosaics
have the mosaics.
Yeah. Chair, I think if we are to go down that line, I think we would need to consider that were that not possible for whatever reason, there ought to be the ability for us to take the view that if it's demonstrated that's not possible or practical, then whatever treatment would be appropriate.
If the amendment included the words "where practicably possible," would that be sufficient?
Or unless it's demonstrated.
Yes, I think you'd want it evidenced, wouldn't you? Yeah. Do you want the final wording to come back to the chairs to approve on that? Yeah.
I trust you on that one, Chair.
Oh, bless you. Okay, can I see a show of hands in favour of that as a condition, if this is passed? That's all bar one. Yeah. Do you want to take a view of abstaining or against?
I'm against, because I just don't know what the outcome of this is going to be. You know, that's the problem. You know, I don't know what it's going to look like.
Well, I think you'd want it demonstrated that it actually fits in. I mean, if the tiles don't match sufficiently, it probably is going to be quite obvious, and we'll have to concede that ain't going to work. Yeah, but it's carried, so that's where we are. I have a couple of questions. We have been told... Okay, Richard, you go first.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a couple of points, really. And again, I've looked through the report, but I can't see them. A couple of questions, but you did mention something. In terms of the self-storage, hours of operation, are they covered off in the conditions?
Just bear with me a moment, Chair. Yes. I'm just checking all the conditions, Chair, but there is an hours of operation condition at number 26 and in effect well, an adjunct to that 28. 28 is more to do with waste movement, but the commercial premises is the wording in the condition, which I'm looking at now and thinking that's a little loose. And it ought to refer to either the Class E space and or the self-storage space. Sorry?
26.
20.
Condition 26. Other compliance conditions. Yep, page 119.
Could we tighten that up then? 2,300 hours. Yeah. But it says on 2,300 hours on any day. Does that include Sundays?
Yes, it does, Chair.
I think it's a bit late on a Sunday, frankly, because car movements and things like that do make noise, and there has to be some rest in this world.
Yeah, Matt, what I would say about that is that is aimed also at the ground floor unit onto London Road, the commercial use onto London Road, where there is clearly a different environment to a kind of a typical residential situation. And so if that was a coffee shop or any other form of kind of food or drink outlet, which it could and quite possibly would be, then 8 in the morning till 11 at night is quite calm for lots of London Road.
I was thinking more about the impact on the residential areas, really.
I think, Chair, that depends on which part of the development, as to whether that's reasonable, that depends on which part of the development you're concerned with. If it's the self-storage unit, then that really only impacts the residents of this scheme. And if members wish to impose a condition restricting the hours of use of that, then I think that's a slightly separate matter to this set out in condition 26, because that's dealing with the commercial Class E use, which I imagine to be successful will need a reasonable amount of flexibility in terms of hours of use on London Road, given the context.
Yeah, again, it comes back to the earlier point, Chris, the impact on the residents and that area rather than necessarily the London Road area.
You mean the residents within the proposed development?
If it affects the consideration, then as with any new development where we have a commercial unit at ground floor on as part of a building with accommodation above, then there's very significant sound attenuation that's built into those facilities. It's much easier to do it with a new development rather than inserting a commercial use into an existing one. And there's quite a well-established set of conditions and procedures for achieving that. So any noise would be limited really to sort of any external activity or whatever, but again the buildings would be sound insulated with good quality glazing, etc. So that's why we've been happy to go with the hours of 8 o'clock till 11 o'clock on any day, and as I say, taking account of the environment generally around London Road with a lot of people and vehicles quite often into the early hours of the morning.
I guess I bow to your better judgment then. On that respect, I had two other quick questions. Regarding the apartments themselves, I couldn't see anything which covers whether the actual sizes of the apartments. Are we happy that they are appropriate for their designations?
Sorry, yes they are, Chair.
Okay.
And I'm pretty certain that I can point you in a second to the relevant page. Yes, so page 143. All of the unit satisfy local and national guidance.
Okay, thank you. And finally, I note that there is actually a cycle storage facility. Is there any scope to ask for some form of bike charging to be added to that? Because, I mean, although this is one of the flatter parts of the city, you know, electric bikes are becoming more and more popular, and if there's no charging facility within the bike storage, it'll mean that people will have to, I assume, take their bikes into their apartments, which is never a good thing. I don't know if that's a condition or a directive, but I can't believe that the applicant would be averse to that type of thing. But can we put something more formal into assuming this is approved?
Chair, whilst I ride a bike, I don't ride an electric bike. Councillor Nottage might be able to advise you a little more on that. But it's my understanding that in most cases the battery is detachable and is recharged, but I'm not certain about that.
That depends very much on the model. There are now a variety of companies providing what would be considered safer charging facilities that include fire detection and fire suppression, which are becoming increasingly desirable, but are not yet included in the NPPF as a requirement, but I think are incredibly sensible things to ask for.
I can't imagine it would be too much of an imposition to include that, Chair.
Could I propose that formally then?
Have a seconder? Yep, we've got seconders. Can we take a vote? Can we take a vote on it? Yeah, all those in favour? That's pretty well, nearly everyone. Yeah. Those against? Abstaining? One abstention. Gary, you have a question or two?
Yeah, it's just following on what Richard was saying. I know it's on demolition, and and it's required about the times of starting and finishing, but storage can be noisy. I know what you're saying, Chris, about it's London Road end, but it's still coming back. People's going backwards and forwards. So I just wonder if we can go to page 121, section 4. It says about I just wonder if we can bring that in line with the storage.
Chair, I'm getting there on the page numbers. So on page 121, that is a list of, well, it's the last couple of conditions and the directives, which are advice notes to the applicant. And all that's really doing is referring the applicant to, it depends which bit of it Councillor Weddell's referring to, Chair, but it's directing the applicant to particular guidance, methods of assessment, and how any further submissions should be undertaken, dealing with things such as noise. So that is there to guide the applicant in future submissions. If you mean by that, if we're concerned by that, shouldn't we be concerned about people coming and going to a storage facility? Then yes, we should to a degree, but actually we're still on that slide, which is, I think, quite significant in that there's that very small, this isn't kind of Big Yellow or something like that. It's a facility that is apparently doing quite well and is prepared to expand. But even those big kind of facilities like that, they don't tend to attract a significant amount of toing and froing. people seem to kind of store stuff there for a while, and it stays for a while. And we anticipate, given the size of the opening, for example, there won't be kind of particularly large vehicles coming here. It's quite often people with a small van or even cars that are kind of storing things that they can't store currently in their own property. So we don't envisage it being of the level that would cause a significant amount of noise, particularly given the sound insulation measures that will be put in place and the testing that will be done of that before it's occupied.
I think, Caroline, you wanted to shed a bit of light on that.
Yeah, I just wondered if it'd be useful to know the current operating hours of the self-storage on Keaton's Hill. It's 8 till 7 in the week and 9 till 4 at the weekend.
Sorry, Chair, can we condition that then, Chris? I mean, it's already in place now, so we don't have to extend it.
If members think that's a reasonable condition to impose, then yes, we could, Chair. Yeah.
Can I see members in favour of that as an additional condition?
Is that unanimous?
It's all that side and on this side. We've either got an abstention or an against. Abstention. Thanks. I want to go back to the interior, where we've not seen any pictures, and yeah, had to go. And but two speakers, Mr. Slack and sorry, the other person, of course, is Ibiela. He's not here, but they both asserted that there are some internal features, like I presume cornices, possibly architraving, plasterwork, much of it hidden by false ceilings. And we know very little about that. I just wonder if we've written off the the internal fabric when some of it could be preserved or maintained.
Chair, effectively it's a facade retention, so it couldn't be retained because the new floor levels, etc., will be put into the building. So it wouldn't, for example, if there was a portion of a ceiling remaining between ground and first floor, then new levels are being put in. A new kind of shell, if you like, is being created behind the facade. So it would be an entirely new structure. It's our understanding from the heritage statement that there is very little of the original features remaining.
Okay. The other thing was just on page 114 of the main report, you've said that the landscaped areas shall be managed and maintained for a period of 5 years from the date of implementation. And I'm wondering whether that is long enough, knowing how if after 5 years there's no maintenance and they all die off, then you're going to be left with quite a barren area, and whether we should be conditioning a longer period on that.
Chair, 5 years is quite an established period nationally, and it's one that we've used for as long as I can recall, Chair. Well, it did used to be 3, in fact, many years ago, but and it was increased to 5, probably, dare I say, about 25, 30 years ago. So it's a very established period for establishing a landscape scheme, is what I would say.
Thank you. Gary.
Chair, just following on what you were saying, I know where you're coming from. I I hope I do anyway, where if we do, if when they're knocking it down, if it gets passed, and they're knocking it down, if they find something, because I'm sure Mr. Slack said he's seen a report from architects or whoever, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
It was from their heritage statement.
Right, so we've got that now. So I just wonder if it can be reused, you know, and you know, and put in the cafe or something, you know, instead of just destroying it, you know, save it so people can say where it was, or a bit of a plaque saying where it was in the building and put it there. Or is that too much hard work, Chris, for a builder to, or is it unfair for us to do that to them?
Chair, I'm just reviewing the conditions to double check. I don't have enough knowledge of the specific items that retain, other than over and above what's in the heritage statement, Chair, to say whether that's a reasonable request or not, and whether anything of a sufficient quality to enable it to be reused in any way. It's possible that a condition could be imposed which required a recording of features of interest, for want of a more specific description, prior to demolition, and consideration be given to incorporation elsewhere in the scheme or something along those lines. But that's not something we've discussed with the applicant, but that is possibly one way of attempting to secure either recording or reuse of any features that are discovered.
Would that be acceptable to you, Gary, that we have an either or, that if it can't preserve stuff but it's clearly visible at the moment, that it's properly recorded for records?
I think that's good. Thanks, Chris, for coming up with that. I think that's, you know, we've got some, you know, photos there can be put in the cafe, can't do that, you know, so there's things like that. And if there's anything what can be salvaged, I'm sure heritage people might tell us where that could go. Thank you.
Okay, does anyone, I take it that's your proposal, Gary. Do we have a seconder for that? Cliff seconding that. Can I see a show of hands in favour? Yeah, that's close to unanimous. Marianne.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, I had my hand up to sort of add to that, just thinking about the historical significance. And I think I read somewhere that a plaque would be welcomed if this goes ahead. So could we add to that an application will be made for a plaque to signify the building's significance in the temperance movement, so that that historical significance is marked?
Yes, Chair. I mean, that is something that we could request.
Okay, I'll propose that then. Thank you. Does that? Are we just going to add that into the previous one?
Sorry. Go on, Janet.
It's just for information that the national official English Heritage Blue Plaque scheme would not put a plaque on a replacement building. It would have to be an original building. So any blue plaque you're talking about in a plaque would just be some arbitrary plaque put up, but wouldn't be, just so that it's clear that you're not talking about an official English Heritage plaque, because that wouldn't happen. So it couldn't be, no.
We could ask for something, yeah, for some statement.
That doesn't preclude that doesn't preclude a separate condition, which I would say it would be a separate condition, that would require identification, interpretation, commemoration, whatever, of the presence of an historical significance of the building that stands or stood on the site.
Have we got a seconder for that? Yes, I see both Henry and Gary have sent hands up. So again, can I see show of hands in favour of this as a condition, an additional condition? Thank you all very much. Now, before we go any further, unfortunately, Case, you left the room during this part of, while this item is being discussed, and that means that you'll not be able to take part in the vote on it. You are, of course, welcome to stay for the final part, which will be the law report. It's can happen to the best of us, so but it's one of those things where, unfortunately, it does rule you out of voting.
Sorry, I just because of the timing in winter, the prayer time for sunset came, so I had to make it before I missed it. I had a window that I had to do it in, so sorry.
Chair, just been.
Yeah, well, perhaps in future members would be happy to allow for an adjournment for you to do that. We failed to appreciate that would occur, and that if we've got a longish agenda, that might be one way round so that you could continue to take part. Yeah, so sorry about that. I think we're at the point, we've added several conditions, but we haven't got to the comments point. So it'd be really useful to hear members' views on whether they want to support or oppose this application. Henry, you have your hand up, so you go first.
Thank you, Chair. I have absolutely no wish to hang a albatross around the neck of the owner or the developer, but I don't think this is the best way to proceed in terms of preserving the asset. I do feel that English heritage isn't the only arbiter of an asset's significance, and the level of local interest from heritage groups, local representatives and the local community tells me that this is a significant asset. It is going to suffer substantial harm, and I will not be supporting the officer's recommendation. If you need a reason, that's because of substantial harm to a significant asset, according to paragraph 11.
Thank you. Vicky.
Or 218.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to take this opportunity to discuss paragraph 11 and the reference that's been made there. Just in terms of the tilted balance and when that doesn't apply. So in terms of paragraph 11, it does say that if the application policy in the framework that protect areas or assets of particular importance provide a strong reason for refusing the development. And then in footnote 7, it then does list the policies in the framework that can provide that strong reason, which includes designated heritage assets. There is then brackets, which then says, and other heritage assets of archaeological interest referred to in footnote 75. So I will just take the opportunity to scroll down to find footnote 75. Yes, apologies for this. It is some way after. Yes, so it does include non-designated heritage assets of archaeological interest which are demonstrably of equivalent significance to scheduled monuments should be considered subject to the policies for designated heritage assets. So just in terms of that, when the tilted balance doesn't apply, here you've got the non-designated heritage assets. So unless footnote 75 applies, which obviously I'd defer to Chris, then the tilted balance should apply in my view. Subject to Chris confirming whether he thinks footnote 75 applies here.
I don't believe it does, because it's talking about non-designated heritage assets of archaeological interest. And I could identify buildings, etc. as well, if that was intended to be part of that consideration.
Cliff, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I can understand people wanting to keep the building, and you know, I would too. But if we leave it, it's going to deteriorate. It's been in this condition, I think, for quite some time. We have the option of going with this development, and my instinct is to do that rather than to leave it to deteriorate. So I shall be voting for it.
Thank you, Cliff. Anyone else want to comment? Nikki?
Yes, similar comment to Councillor Woodcroft. I think ideally we'd want to preserve it, given the situation and how long it's sat there. It's not ideal, but yeah, we do need more housing in the city centre area, and this would provide a reasonable amount going towards that number.
Thank you. Marianne?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that this building hasn't been in use since 2007. So I certainly don't oppose to redevelopment in principle. It's a good location for housing, lots of amenities nearby. But given the major concern that the design really could be more sympathetic to the local heritage, and it would have been nice to see more efforts to this end. I think the loss of that Victorian roof is going to permanently harm the historic character. And really, yeah, we need to see a more sort of sympathetic conversion. This essentially is a partial demolition of an asset of local significance. And this, I suppose, this trend of facadism, you know, only really seems to benefit the developer's profit margin. So I do find it very hard to support this particular application. I'm still undecided.
Thank you, Marianne. Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I just follow on from that. I mean, this is incredibly difficult because this is clearly a site that needs redeveloping for most of the site, because from what most of our questions and most of the concerns have been about the Cocoa House, about 136 to 138 London Road, not the rest of the site. And I think that's why we're all finding it so difficult. But I mean, I have a lot of sympathy with Michael Barlow, the owner, that the fact that, you know, along with many other developments, building was in hand in 2008, and then the financial crash came, and then, you know, a number of properties were then finished or not finished or re-demolished or whatever, what have you. So I get the difficulty of it. I also hear the numbers, you know, in terms of viability, that this is, you know, this is not one of those schemes that's going to make a huge amount of percentage profit. And we've just added lots of conditions that are going to eat it, that potentially could make. So I get all that, but it comes back to what Councillor Elliott's just said, that, you know, we've had, you know, the Hallamshire Historic Building Society, the Victorian Society, a number of other heritage organisations saying, and our heritage champion herself, and the local councillors, all saying the importance of this as the first coffee and cocoa house in a world when we had hundreds of public houses. And in the history of the last 40 or 50 years, where we have been losing our Victorian heritage at a massive rate, and that's often because they're difficult to redevelop and all the rest. And I think it's just frustrating that this application has ended up wanting to put extra stories on 136, 138, rather than finding a solution for that property that we could at least, as you say, go back to English Heritage and put an official plaque on, rather than creating our own plaque and putting it on. And I think it's the loss of the roof and the extra stories which mean it will not be the same. So I think we're really struggling, and I say, you know, like the previous speaker, I'm struggling with this, because this is not the scheme I want, but equally I know we need more housing, and this is more housing, and I'm struggling on that basis. Thanks, Jeff.
Does anyone else want to comment? Mark?
I'm struggling with it in the sense as well, like other people have said, that we certainly need the housing. But I was influenced by the fact that there's all this stuff inside the roof spaces and stuff that is likely to be lost or incorporated into someone's flat or something like that. What I would prefer is this new building at the back made into flats, but there are businesses that take over properties like the front bit, like Wetherspoons, for instance, and preserve the interiors in a sympathetic manner. I would much prefer to see the two things separate, flats for the new bit and some sort of commercial operation that preserves the interior for the front bit. Therefore, I'm minded to go against the proposal.
Glynis? Oh, sorry. Vicky.
Sorry, Chair, I just want to clarify that obviously they had a speaker mentioning what they would prefer to see and therefore the way they intend to vote. Obviously, you're deciding this application based on its planning merits, in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise, and what you'd prefer to see on site isn't relevant consideration in that instance. Thank you, Chair.
Glynis.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, when we were walking around it yesterday, all I could think was, all this area needs to be reused. How are we going to reuse it? That was my main concern. It's all dilapidated at the front. There's that empty building at the back. There's a big space of now trees where the pub used to be. And it all needs to be redeveloped. And having looked at the size of the properties, this is the first scheme I've seen where we've not criticised the size of a one-bedroom place because it's too small to put your bed in. And I just think, I don't feel that the developer's gone over the top in getting the most out of it for the money. I think it's more sympathetic. It's very difficult to save everything. And I think this building's, saving the freezers on the front were the things that were most striking on this building. Obviously, we never got to see the inside, but that would have been changed so much when it's been redeveloped through years.
Gary.
I'm sorry to keep doing to you, Chair, but it's what we've got in front of us. We can't change anything. If a pub chain or a restaurant chain came in, I'm sure, because it's been up on market for a while, somebody would have come along with that. And where we are is where we are. We don't want to lose it. And I think doing what they're going to do to this building keeps something. You know what I mean? And if we get some photo evidence of that, or if there's anything that we can reuse, architectural stuff, that's great. So I shall be supporting this, Chair. Thank you.
Does anyone else want to comment? I suppose the way I see this is that this is a building that's gone through iterations. A few months ago, we saw a Methodist church and its school, or Sunday school, and it was built at a similar time. And although the interior had things done to it, certainly in the school part, the whole structure was more or less intact. And unfortunately, what we've got here is a building which has been chopped about quite a bit, including its 60s iteration with the friezes and the mosaic tiles, and then the wear and tear on those. It's quite interesting that some of that hasn't survived as well as the older stuff, and then you see the building at the back as well, which is in very, very poor condition. And on top of that, we have where we are with the development plan. That until we get a new Sheffield plan, we cannot show a sufficient housing supply for this city, which we so desperately need. And so that does rather tilt the balance more in favour of this than wanting, as Mark put it, wanting to see a different scheme. Anyway, we will move to the vote on it. So can I see all those in favour of the officer recommendation? Can I see those against? 3. Any abstentions? This application is passed. It's through. Okay. Thank you all for your time on that one. There was a lot of good points raised and a lot of good discussion on it. We can now move on to the law report, and if we get through that quickly, we can all go home. So that's item 10 on page 151, record of, well actually it's more record of planning appeals and submissions and decisions. It is for noting, but do members have any questions or comments on it? I would just comment that overall the record on getting getting the inspectors to agree with us or with our officers is encouraging on most of them. Yes, that was a surprise, and it was our decision. Yes, and the independent inspector did not agree with us, and they feel it's okay for people to play on well into the evening down indoor. Okay, well, if you're happy to note the report, yes? Thank you, members. Next committee meeting will be on Tuesday the 10th of February at 2 p.m. in the Town Hall. So I'll see you then, if not before, and on the site visits.